Hello there, and welcome. I'm so glad you could join me tonight. Find a comfortable spot, and let's talk about something remarkable, a story of life that hides in plain sight. Tonight we're going to get to know a plant so common, so deceptively ordinary, that you have almost certainly walked past it without a second thought. It grows in manicured city parks, in the ambitious gardens of our neighbors, and sometimes as a stubborn, beautiful weed in forgotten lots. It's a plant of profound duality, a living paradox of nurture and danger, of ancient medicine and modern menace. Before we begin our journey, if you enjoy what we do here, this quiet exploration of the natural world, I would be so grateful if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It's a small, silent gesture that helps our little community grow, and I always love to know who I'm speaking with, scattered across the globe in the quiet of the night. So if you feel like it, please leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. It's a wonderful thought, knowing we're all connected by these stories under the same stars. Now, that's enough of that. The real reason we're here is to find a little peace, a little wonder. So I invite you to do whatever you need to do to get comfortable. Dim the lights, pull the covers up just a little higher, and find that perfect cool spot on your pillow. Close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath. And as you exhale, let go of the day. Let its thoughts and its worries simply drift away. We are going somewhere else now. We are shrinking down, just for a little while, to the quiet, patient, and deeply strange world of a single plant. Chapter 1. The Gardener's Gambit, a plant of profound duality. Let's begin in a place that feels familiar, a garden. It could be any garden, anywhere in the temperate or tropical world. It is late spring, and the sun is warm. The soil, dark and rich with the promise of life, has been turned and tended. And in one corner, a gardener has planted a seed. This seed is not like the fine dust of a poppy or the humble speck of a carrot. This seed is a statement. It's large, plump, and bean-like, but its surface is a masterpiece of natural art. It is a mosaic of browns, blacks, and creams, swirled together in a pattern so intricate and unique that no two seeds are ever exactly alike. It looks less like a seed and more like a polished stone, a piece of organic jewelry. It feels cool and smooth in the palm of your hand, heavy with a latent energy. The gardener presses it into the warm soil, covers it, and waits, and they do not have to wait for long. The plant that erupts from this seed is not a quiet, demure little herb. It is an explosion of botanical ambition. This is Ricinus communis, the Castor Bean plant. In a single season, from that one ornate seed, it can surge upwards to become a towering, tree-like structure, reaching heights of 10, 12, even 15 feet. It is less a plant, and more a piece of temporary architecture, a tropical palace built of cellulose and sunlight, erected for a single summer's rain. Its leaves are immense. They are palmate, shaped like giant, open hands, with deep, pointed lobes spreading out from a central point. They can be a deep, glossy green, or a stunning, brooding bronze red that seems to drink the sunlight. The veins run like roadways across their vast expanse, a complex circulatory system carrying water and nutrients to the farthest edges. When the wind moves through them, they don't just rustle, they make a sound like shuffling paper, a dry, whispering hiss. In a light rain, each leaf becomes a vast watershed, collecting droplets that tremble and merge into heavy quicksilver beads before spilling over the edge in a miniature waterfall. To stand beneath a mature castor plant is to feel as though you have entered a different, more primitive world, a small temporary jungle in your own backyard. The stems are thick and hollow, often sharing the same reddish or purplish hue as the leaves, a color that comes from anthocyanin pigments, the same compounds that give color to blueberries and autumn leaves. They are nature's plumbing, sturdy pipes that can channel gallons of water from the roots to the canopy on a hot day. And then there are the flowers, which are perhaps the strangest part of all. They are not showy like a rose or a lily. They are complex, alien-looking structures called inflorescences. The male flowers, clustered on the lower part of the spike, are a creamy yellow, little bursts of pollen-dusted stamens. Above them sit the female flowers, which are truly extraordinary. They are spiky, crimson structures, looking like tiny sea anemones or bursts of red stars, their feathery stigmas reaching out to catch the passing pollen on the wind. And from these pollinated female flowers, the seed pods develop. They are the plant's armor, its treasure chests. They are spherical and covered in soft green spines, looking like medieval weapons or strange sea urchins. Inside these fortified spheres, nestled in their own separate chambers, the seeds mature, the beautiful mottled seeds that started this whole process. 3 to a pod, typically. As the pod dries in the late summer sun, it turns brown and brittle. The pressure inside builds, until one hot afternoon it explodes. It's a process called explosive dehiscence, a wonderfully dramatic name for a plant flinging its children as far away as possible. The seeds can be launched over 30 feet away, a gunshot dispersal ensuring the next generation doesn't have to compete with its parent for sun and water. This plant, this temporary summer giant, is what botanists call a cosmopolitan species. While its deepest roots are likely in northeastern Africa and the Middle East, it has become a fellow traveler with humanity. It has hitched a ride on our trade routes, in our cargo holds, and in the pockets of colonists and plant collectors, until it has put down roots on every continent except Antarctica. It is a weed in the wilder parts of California, and a cultivated crop in the fields of India. It is an ornamental statement piece in an English cottage garden, and a towering feral presence on the banks of an Australian river. Its very name is a piece of historical misinterpretation. The Romans, specifically the naturalist Pliny the Elder, are thought to have called it Ricinus because the seed bears a striking resemblance to a certain type of tick of the same name. And the common name Castor Bean is another beautiful mistake. It is not a bean at all. It belongs to the spurge family, a vast and varied clan of plants, many of which are known for their milky, often toxic sap. The castor part of the name is thought to have come about much later, perhaps as a replacement for the Latin name, and possibly because its oil came to be used as a substitute for castoreum, a secretion from beavers used in perfumery and medicine. So its very identity is wrapped in layers of mistaken identity, of looking like one thing and being called another. For centuries, this was the primary relationship humanity had with the plant. It was an object of curiosity and aesthetic appeal. Victorian-era gardeners, with their passion for the exotic and the dramatic, adored it. It fit perfectly into their subtropical bedding schemes, creating a sense of far-flung colonial grandeur in the often grey climate of Britain. To plant a castor bean was to plant a spectacle. It was a boast, a declaration of horticultural ambition. It was, and still is, a plant that people cultivate for its sheer, unadulterated drama. It asks for little, just sun, water and space, and in return it provides a theatrical performance of growth, a living sculpture that changes week by week. And for almost all of human history, that is all it was to most people. A beautiful, if somewhat imposing, garden plant. But woven through that history is another, much deeper and more intimate relationship. A relationship not with the whole plant, but with the precious substance locked inside its beautiful, deadly-looking seeds. A relationship with castor oil. To understand the profound duality of this plant, we must first understand the oil. Because for millennia, the oil was everything. It was a medicine, a fuel, an industrial lubricant, and even an instrument of power. The story of castor oil is the story of humanity's attempt to harness the gentle, beneficial side of this paradoxical plant. Our journey to find the origins of this relationship takes us back to the very dawn of recorded history, to the banks of the Nile, to ancient Egypt. In tombs dating back over 4,000 years, archaeologists have found castor seeds, placed there with the same care as grains and precious metals. They were provisions for the afterlife, a vital component of existence that a soul would not want to be without on its long journey. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest and most important medical texts in human history, dating to around 1550 BC, contains hundreds of prescriptions and remedies, and within its ancient script, there are multiple references to the use of castor oil. Imagine a physician in the time of the pharaohs. Their world is one of gods and magic, but also of keen observation. They see that this thick, viscous oil, when ingested, has a powerful, undeniable effect on the human body. It is a purgative, a laxative of immense power. In a world where concepts of disease were often tied to ideas of internal blockages or impurities, a substance that could so thoroughly and forcefully cleanse the body was seen as a powerful tool of healing. It was a reset button for the digestive system. But its use wasn't purely medicinal. The Egyptians, brilliant and practical engineers, used it for everything. They burned it in their lamps. Imagine the light that filled the chambers of a temple, or the workshop of a scribe. It would have been a soft, gentle glow, perhaps smoky, with a distinctive, slightly oily scent, all courtesy of the castor seed. They used it as a cosmetic, rubbing it into their skin and hair to protect them from the harsh, desiccating Egyptian sun. It was an all-purpose balm, a source of light, and a powerful medicine, all pressed from a single beautiful seed. It was woven into the very fabric of their civilization. And this was not unique to Egypt. Half a world away, in ancient India, a parallel story was unfolding. In the traditions of Ayurvedic medicine, castor oil, known as Aranda was also a cornerstone of wellness. It was prized for its ability to treat a vast array of ailments, from arthritis to skin conditions. It too was known primarily for its cleansing, purgative properties, seen as a way to rebalance the body's essential energies, or doshas. This knowledge wasn't a secret held by a priestly class. It was folk wisdom passed down from mother to daughter, a staple in the home apothecary. As civilizations rose and fell, the knowledge of this remarkable oil traveled with them. The ancient Greeks wrote of it. Herodotus, the father of history, described its cultivation and use by the Egyptians. In the Roman Empire, Pliny the Elder documented it in his encyclopedic work, Natural History. He noted its harshness as a medicine, but celebrated its utility as a lamp oil, observing that it was second only to olive oil in its usefulness. It was always there, in the background of history, a quiet, reliable servant. But what is it about this oil that makes it so unique? To understand that, we need to zoom in, to shrink down to the molecular level. Castor oil is composed of triglycerides, like all fats and oils, but it is unique. Around 90% of its fatty acid content is one specific molecule, ricinoleic acid. This molecule has a peculiar structure, a kink in its chain, and a hydroxyl group, an oxygen and hydrogen atom bonded together, sticking off the side. This small detail of molecular architecture is the secret to everything. It makes the oil incredibly viscous, thicker and more syrupy than almost any other vegetable oil. It also gives it a consistent performance across a wide range of temperatures. It doesn't easily freeze solid, and it doesn't break down at high heat. This unique chemical personality meant that as humanity entered the Industrial Revolution, castor oil found a new calling. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the world began to move faster. We built machines of iron and steel, engines with pistons and gears that moved with incredible speed and generated immense heat and friction. And these new machines needed a new kind of lubrication. Petroleum-based lubricants were still in their infancy. Olive oil and other vegetable oils would break down, burn, or become gummy under the intense conditions inside an internal combustion engine. But castor oil was different. It could withstand the heat. Its viscous nature meant it clung to metal parts, providing a constant protective film. It became the lifeblood of the new machine age. The very first automobiles often ran on castor oil-based lubricants, and when humanity took to the skies, castor oil went with us. The rotary engines of World War I fighter planes, like the Sopwith Camel and the Fokker-Drodo I, were masterpieces of engineering, but they were notoriously difficult to lubricate. They relied on a total loss lubrication system, which meant the oil was injected into the engine, did its job, and was then spat out with the exhaust. Pilots from that era would talk of the smell and the taste of castor oil. The fine atomized mist of burnt oil would stream back from the engine, coating their goggles, their scarves, and their faces. It was a constant companion in the cockpit, the smell of aerial combat. It was so prevalent that it often had the same laxative effect on the pilots as it did on patients, an unwelcome side effect in the heat of a dogfight. But without it, without this humble oil pressed from a garden plant, those engines would have seized, and the history of aviation might have looked very different. The brand name Castrol, which is still one of the world's leading lubricant manufacturers, takes its name directly from castor oil. It is a quiet testament to the oil's industrial legacy. So here we have this substance that lit the tombs of pharaohs, healed the sick in ancient India, and lubricated the engines of the first aerial warriors. It seems almost miraculous, a benevolent gift from a beautiful plant. But the story of its relationship with humanity has a darker, more coercive chapter. The very property that made it a respected medicine, its power as a purgative, also made it a tool of punishment and humiliation. For generations of children in the Western world, the phrase "a dose of castor oil" was a threat. It was a cure-all, administered by parents and grandparents for any number of perceived infractions or illnesses. Its taste is famously unpleasant, thick, oily, and nauseating. The experience of being forced to swallow a spoonful of it became a cultural touchstone, a shared memory of childhood helplessness in the face of adult authority. It was medicine as punishment, wellness delivered with a grimace. But this domestic tyranny pales in comparison to its use as a deliberate instrument of political violence. In fascist Italy, under the rule of Benito Mussolini, castor oil was weaponized. The Black Shirts, Mussolini's paramilitary squads, used it as a method of torture and public humiliation against political dissidents and opponents. They would capture a person, restrain them, and force-feed them enormous quantities of castor oil. The physical effect was swift, brutal, and dehydrating. But the primary goal was not physical harm, it was psychological destruction. It was a way to break a person's spirit, to rob them of their dignity, to reduce them to a state of helpless public agony. It was a particularly cruel form of violence, turning a tool of healing into an agent of shame. The Italian socialist Antonio Gramsci wrote from prison about how this tactic was designed to mock and neutralize the victim, to make them seem powerless and ridiculous. The slogan of the Black Shirts was Manganello e olio di ricino, the cudgel and castor oil. One was for breaking bones, the other for breaking the soul. It is a chilling reminder that humanity can twist even the most beneficial gifts of nature to serve its darkest impulses. And so, as we stand back and look at the long, sprawling history of this plant's relationship with us, we see this profound and unsettling duality begin to take shape. Here is a plant of stunning beauty, an ornamental prize that brings a touch of the exotic to our gardens. And from its seeds we have pressed an oil that has been a constant, faithful servant for 4,000 years, an oil that has healed us, lit our way, driven our machines, and carried us into the sky. But it is also an oil whose power has been used to control, to punish, and to humiliate. It is a plant of nurture and of force, a gardener's delight and a tool of oppression. It seems to embody the best and worst of our own nature, reflected in how we choose to use it. But this duality, this story of good and ill, is only the beginning. We have spent all this time talking about the oil, the substance that is pressed out of the seed. We have followed its journey through history, from the Nile to the Western Front, from the pharmacy to the torture chamber. We have not yet spoken about what is left behind. After the seed is crushed and the thick, life-giving, world-changing oil is squeezed out, a dry, crumbly material remains, a pulp. It is called castor pomace. And for centuries this pulp was considered little more than a waste product, perhaps to be used as a fertilizer, as it is rich in nitrogen. But locked within that dry, unassuming pulp is the other half of the paradox. It is the plant's secret, its defense mechanism, its masterpiece of biochemical engineering. It is the reason the seed wears such beautiful, intricate armor. It is the reason that, despite its ubiquitous presence in our gardens, poison control centers receive calls about it every year. Within that pulp resides one of the most potent and exquisitely complex toxins ever discovered in the natural world. A molecule of such elegant and deadly precision that it has fascinated scientists and terrified governments for over a century. The gentle giving nature of the oil is a beautiful truth, but it is a truth that cleverly masks a far more dangerous one. We have been admiring the open, friendly hand of the plant, without yet considering what the other hand, clenched into a fist, holds in secret. The gardener, in planting this seed, has made a gambit. They have wagered on the beauty, on the utility, on the history. They have invited this creature of profound duality into their home. And now we must begin to understand the other side of that bargain. We must look past the oil and into the poison. Chapter 2. The Protein of Paralysis. Deconstructing Ricin. And so we look. We look into the poison. To do so, we must change our perspective entirely. We must leave behind the familiar world of stems and leaves, of sunlight and soil, and begin a journey inwards, shrinking down past the limits of our own senses into the realm of the truly small. We are traveling to a place where shape is everything, where function is dictated not by will, but by the unthinking, unfeeling laws of attraction and repulsion, of fit and form. We are going to meet the agent of that poison, not as a powder or a substance, but as what it truly is, a machine, a molecular machine of breathtaking precision and terrifying purpose. It is called Ricin. To call it a single thing is, from the outset, a slight misdirection. It is more of a partnership, a complex of two separate proteins, two distinct ideas that are chained together to accomplish a single devastating task. Imagine two intricate, folded ribbons of amino acids, two polypeptide chains, held together by the most delicate of connections, a single slender bridge of sulfur atoms, a disulfide bond. It is a molecular handcuff, linking a scout to an executioner. Scientists, in their beautifully direct language, simply call them the A chain and the B chain. Let us consider the B chain first, for it is the diplomat, the envoy, the part of Ricin that interacts with the world outside. It is in essence a master key. Its surface is a landscape of divots and protrusions, a specific three-dimensional question posed to the universe. It drifts through a biological system, be it the lining of the gut or the river of the bloodstream, and it asks this question of every surface it meets. It bumps against the wall of a red blood cell, a muscle fiber, a nerve ending, and there is no answer. The key does not fit the lock, but eventually, inevitably, it encounters a cell that has the right answer on its surface. Most of the cells in our body do. The lock that the B chain seeks is a common one, a type of sugar molecule, a glycoprotein called galactose, that studs the outer membrane of our cells like antennae, communicating with the world outside. When the Ricin B chain meets one of these galactose residues, it binds. It is not a violent act. It is a quiet, perfect click of recognition. A key sliding into a lock, a ship mooring at its designated dock. The B chain's job, its entire purpose for being, is to latch on, to hold the entire Ricin molecule fast to the outer wall of an unsuspecting cell, waiting for the next step. It is the scout that has found the target. It is the advance agent that has secured the point of entry. It does not know what it has done. It is a shape, and it has found its counterpart. That is all. And tethered to it, patiently, silently, is the A chain. If the B chain is the key, the A chain is the saboteur. It is an enzyme, a biological catalyst. In the world of molecules, an enzyme is a specialist tool, a worker that performs one task, and performs it with incredible speed and efficiency. A molecular welder, or a microscopic pair of scissors. The A chain is the latter. It is a weapon, but for now, it is sheathed. As long as it is handcuffed to the B chain and floating outside the cell, it is inert. It can do no harm. Its devastating potential is held in check, waiting to be released. The whole structure, this two-part machine, now clings to the surface of our cell, a silent, molecular Trojan horse that has just arrived at the city gates. And the city, tragically, opens them. The cell does not recognize ricin as a threat. It only recognizes a molecule docked at one of its own receptors. This is a common occurrence. Cells are constantly taking in materials from the outside world. Hormones, nutrients, and other signaling molecules dock with the surface all the time. So the cell does what it is programmed to do. The cell membrane, that soft fluid barrier, begins to dimple inwards where the ricin molecule is bound. It forms a small pocket, a pouch, which envelops the ricin molecule completely. Then the pocket pinches off from the outer membrane and drifts into the interior of the cell, a tiny self-contained bubble. This process is called endocytosis. It is the cell's way of saying, I don't know what this is, but it has the right credentials, so let's bring it inside for processing. The ricin molecule is now inside the fortress. It floats within its little transport vessel, a vesicle called an endosome, and begins a journey along the cell's internal superhighways. It is shuttled from one organelle to another, from one processing station to the next. It moves through the winding channels of the endoplasmic reticulum and into the stacked, flattened sacs of the Golgi apparatus. This is the cell's internal mailroom and quality control center. It is here that new proteins are folded, modified, and packaged for delivery elsewhere. And it is here, in the sophisticated chemical environment of the cell's own workshops, that the trap is sprung. Within these compartments are the cell's own tools, a suite of enzymes whose job it is to cut and modify other proteins. One of these enzymes, a protein disulfide isomerase, stumbles upon the ricin molecule, and it does what it is designed to do. It sees the disulfide bond, that single sulfur handcuff linking the B chain to the A chain, and it snips it. It is a moment of profound and silent biochemical significance. With this one simple enzymatic cut, the A chain is liberated, the saboteur is unsheathed, the executioner has been unchained from its guide. The B chain has done its job. It has gotten the A chain inside the cell, and it will be unceremoniously broken down and recycled. But the A chain, the active toxic part of the molecule, is now free. It must still perform one final act of escape. It has to get out of the Golgi apparatus and into the cell's main compartment, the vast open ocean of the cytoplasm. It does this through a cunning piece of molecular mimicry, tricking the cell's own transport mechanisms into ejecting it not outside the cell, but into the cytosol. It is now, finally, where it needs to be. A single, rogue enzyme, a wolf loose in the pasture, and it begins to hunt. Its prey is perhaps the single most important piece of machinery in all of life. It is the engine of existence, the structure that turns genetic code into physical reality. It is the ribosome. To understand what happens next, we must pause and marvel at the ribosome itself. Every living cell in your body, in the tree outside your window, in the bacteria in the soil, is filled with them. Tens of thousands, sometimes millions of them, in a single cell. A ribosome is not a simple thing. It is itself a colossal, intricate machine made of dozens of proteins and strands of RNA, all folded together into a precise and beautiful shape. It is life's 3D printer. Its job is to read the blueprint of life, the messenger RNA that carries instructions from the DNA in the nucleus, and to build everything the cell needs. Imagine a strand of messenger RNA as a long piece of ticker tape, threaded through the ribosome. The ribosome reads the code on this tape, 3 letters at a time. For each 3-letter word, a specific amino acid, a single protein building block is brought to the factory. The ribosome, with astonishing speed and fidelity, takes this amino acid and stitches it onto the one that came before it, creating a growing chain. The ticker tape continues to feed through, and the chain gets longer and longer, amino acid by amino acid, until a new protein is born. This is happening constantly, billions upon billions of times a second, throughout your entire body. The keratin that makes your hair, the collagen that holds your skin together, the hemoglobin that carries oxygen in your blood, the enzymes that digest your food, every single one is built, one amino acid at a time, by these tireless essential factories called ribosomes. Protein synthesis is not just a part of life. In a very real sense, it is life. To stop the ribosomes is to stop life itself. And the Ricin A chain knows, with an ancient chemical certainty, exactly how to do that. It drips through the cytoplasm, a sea of molecules, ignoring everything else. It is not looking for the nucleus or the mitochondria or any other organelle. It is looking for a ribosome. When it finds one, it latches on, and it performs its one, exquisitely specific act of sabotage. It is a molecular surgeon of unimaginable precision. It targets a single critical loop of RNA on the large subunit of the ribosome, a section so vital that it is now known as the sarsin-ricin loop. And on that loop it finds one specific nucleotide, a single letter in the ribosome's own structural code, a base called adenine, and it cuts it out. The act itself is called dedenylation. The A chain is an N-glycosidase enzyme. It plucks out that single adenine base like a phantom thief stealing one specific jewel from a crown. It doesn't destroy the ribosome. It doesn't cause it to explode or fall apart. From the outside, the ribosome looks perfectly fine, but the damage is absolute and irreversible. By removing that single critical adenine base, the Ricin A chain has broken the ribosome's ability to bind to other factors it needs to build proteins. The ticker tape of mRNA can still be fed in, the amino acid delivery trucks can still arrive, but the factory's central mechanism is jammed. The ribosome can no longer stitch the new amino acids together. The assembly line has been permanently shut down. The 3D printer has been lobotomized. It is a perfect minimalist act of destruction. And here is the most terrifying part of the entire process. The Ricin A chain is an enzyme, a catalyst. This means it is not consumed in the reaction. After it has mutilated one ribosome, it releases it and moves on to the next, and the next, and the next. A single solitary A chain molecule can inactivate ribosomes at a rate of up to 1,500 per minute. It is a silent, relentless assassin, moving through the cell and systematically shutting down every protein factory it can find. One by one, the life-giving hum of protein synthesis begins to fade. Now we must zoom our perspective back out, to the level of the whole cell. What happens to a city when all of its factories, all of its workshops, all of its construction sites suddenly and simultaneously go silent? At first, nothing seems to change. The cell has reserves of proteins already made, and it can function for a little while. But proteins are not permanent structures. They are constantly being broken down and replaced. The cell's very structure is maintained by a skeleton of proteins that needs constant repair. The enzymes that generate energy, the pumps that maintain the cell's internal balance, the messengers that allow it to communicate with its neighbors, all of them have a limited lifespan. And now, none of them can be replaced. Slowly, inevitably, the cell begins to die. It is a death not by explosion, but by a quiet, creeping paralysis. Its internal structures begin to fail. Its energy levels plummet. It can no longer repair itself. It can no longer perform its function. The machinery of life has been halted, and the cell, starved of its essential components, begins the process of shutting down. It may initiate its own self-destruct sequence, a process called apoptosis, neatly packaging itself up for disposal. Or it may simply fall into disrepair and rupture, a process called necrosis, spilling its contents and causing inflammation in the surrounding tissues. One cell dies. And we must remember that the initial dose of poison did not contain one molecule of ricin. It contained trillions. And so this process is not happening in one cell. It is happening in thousands, in millions, in billions of cells, all at once. A wave of silent cellular death begins to spread through the affected tissue. The nature of this creeping death, the symptoms that manifest on the scale of a human body, depends entirely on how the poison found its way in. The journey defines the devastation. Consider ingestion, the swallowing of the castor beans. This is, paradoxically, the least effective route for the poison. Ricin is a protein, and our digestive system is a place designed to dismantle proteins. The searing acid of the stomach and the powerful digestive enzymes of the small intestine will denature and destroy a great deal of the ricin molecules before they can ever reach their targets. But some will survive. Some of the molecular machines will endure the perilous journey, and their B chains will latch onto the cells lining the intestine. The result is a localized war. The cells of the gut wall begin to shut down and die. This leads to severe abdominal pain, vomiting, and internal bleeding. The body's first line of defense is breached from within. If enough ricin is absorbed from the gut into the bloodstream, the poison then goes systemic, and the real quiet catastrophe begins. The ricin molecules travel through the circulatory system, exiting the blood vessels and seeking out cells in the body's vital organs. The liver, the spleen, the kidneys all become targets. Their cells begin to die, their function begins to fail, and the entire system spirals towards collapse over the course of several days. It is a slow, agonizing process. Now consider a different route: inhalation. If ricin is processed into a fine aerosol and breathed into the lungs, the story changes dramatically. It bypasses the harsh, destructive environment of the digestive tract entirely. The lungs are designed for gas exchange, for bringing the outside world into intimate contact with the bloodstream. Their vast, delicate surface area, covered in a thin layer of cells, is a perfect gateway. When ricin particles land here, they are rapidly absorbed. The attack is twofold. First, there is a massive localized assault on the cells of the lungs themselves. As they die, the tissue breaks down, leading to a build-up of fluid in the lungs, pulmonary edema. Breathing becomes difficult, then impossible. But at the same time, the ricin that is absorbed into the bloodstream is whisked away to the rest of the body. The systemic failure that takes days to develop with ingestion can begin within hours. It is a far more rapid and far more lethal mode of attack. Finally, there is injection, the direct introduction of ricin into the muscle tissue or the bloodstream. This is the assassin's method, the one depicted in fiction and whispered about in intelligence circles. It bypasses all of the body's major external defenses. There is no stomach acid to contend with, no filtration in the nose or throat. The poison is delivered directly to the internal environment. From here, it is distributed with ruthless efficiency by the circulatory system. Every organ is seeded with the molecular machines at once. The onset of symptoms is swift, and the progression to multi-organ failure is terrifyingly rapid. The silent, cellular paralysis takes hold of the entire body simultaneously. It is this potency, this elegant and absolute mechanism of action, that has given ricin its fearsome reputation. The idea of a poison so powerful that an amount the size of a few grains of salt can be lethal is the stuff of nightmares and of spy thrillers. We have seen it used in fiction, a convenient plot device for a perfect, untraceable murder. Walter White's Lily of the Valley was, in reality, concealing the chemistry of the castor bean. But here, science and story begin to diverge. The reality of weaponizing ricin is far more complex than a simple grinding of beans. Producing ricin is, in one sense, very easy. The raw material is abundant, a waste product of castor oil production. But the mash that is left over is just that, a crude, impure mixture. To turn this into a stable, weaponized agent, especially one suitable for aerosol dispersal, is an immense technical challenge. The ricin protein must be purified, a delicate and complex biochemical process. It is sensitive to heat and ultraviolet light, which can break it down and render it useless. It needs to be milled into particles of a very specific size, too large, and they will be filtered out by the nose and throat, too small, and they will simply be exhaled. Creating a powder that is stable, pure, and has the correct aerodynamic properties is not kitchen chemistry. It is the work of a sophisticated laboratory. This is the great paradox of ricin. At the molecular level, It is one of the most perfect and potent killing machines nature has ever devised. Its efficiency is almost beyond comprehension, but at the macroscopic level, it is a fragile, finicky, and difficult substance to handle. It is a poison of profound power, but it is not the magical, unstoppable agent of fiction. It is a real-world biological entity, with all the complexities and limitations that implies, and so our journey inwards comes to a close. We have traveled from a speckled, beautiful bean down into the microscopic world of the cell. We have witnessed a molecular key finding its lock, a cellular city tricked into opening its gates to a hidden enemy. We have watched a single elegant molecule find the most important machine in the factory of life, and with a single surgical cut, turn it off forever. We must remember that this mechanism was not designed with us in mind. This is not the product of malice, but of evolution. This is a plant's defense, a silent chemical scream perfected over millions of years to protect itself from whatever might try to eat its precious seeds. We are simply colossal, collateral damage in an ancient microscopic war. The poison is not evil, it is merely a solution to a problem. And as the cell falls silent, a factory of life brought to a halt by a key that was never meant for its lock, a new story begins. It is the story of the aftermath. This microscopic tragedy, repeated millions of times, writes a story on a human scale, a story of symptoms, of suffering, and of the desperate, ongoing search for a way to warn the gatekeepers, to seize the saboteur, or to somehow, against all odds, turn the silent machines back on. Chapter 3. The Umbrella Man. Ricin and the Cold War. But sometimes the goal isn't to turn the machines back on. Sometimes the silence is the entire point. The microscopic sabotage, the quiet cessation of life inside a single cell, becomes the perfect tool for a much larger and much more human kind of silence. The goal is not just to stop a heart, but to stop a voice, to erase a story, and for this you need a weapon that leaves no author, a crime that tells no tales. And so our story moves. It leaves the quiet internal world of the ribosome, the intricate dance of proteins and RNA, and travels across time and space to the cold, grey pavement of London in the late 1970s, specifically to Waterloo Bridge on the 7th of September 1978, a date that would become a chilling landmark in the history of toxicology and espionage. The day the silent machines inside a man named Georgy Markov began to be turned off, one, by a saboteur no larger than the head of a pin. To understand the event on the bridge, we first have to understand the man. Georgy Markov was not a soldier or a spy in the traditional sense. He was a writer, a playwright, an artist. And in the Bulgaria of the Cold War, under the long and oppressive shadow of the Soviet Union and its own authoritarian leader, Todor Zhivkov, an artist's words could be more dangerous than any weapon. For a time, Markov was one of Bulgaria's literary stars, favored by the regime. He had access, he had privilege, he saw the inner workings of the state, the casual corruption, the sycophancy, the deep rot beneath the veneer of communist ideology, and he grew to despise it. The artist in him, the part that craved truth, could no longer coexist with the state's demand for convenient fictions. In 1969, while in Italy, he made a choice that so many during that era had to make. He chose freedom. He defected, eventually settling in London, a city of fog and drizzle, but also a city where he could breathe, and most importantly, where he could write. And write. He did. He found a new home, a new life with his wife Annabelle. He began to work for the BBC World Service and for Radio Free Europe, a broadcaster funded by the United States with the express purpose of piercing the Iron Curtain. From a small studio in London, Markov's voice, calm and articulate, travelled on the airwaves back to the country he had left behind. He began a series of broadcasts, titled In Absentia Reports on Bulgaria. In these reports he did something unforgivable. He told the truth. He painted vivid, intimate, and often satirical portraits of the very men who ruled Bulgaria. He described Todor Zhivkov not as a glorious leader, but as a vain, insecure man of moderate intelligence. He exposed the hypocrisy and mediocrity of the ruling elite, using the one weapon they could not tolerate, ridicule. To the men in Sofia, in the headquarters of the Državna Sigurnost, the Bulgarian secret police, this was not dissent, it was treason. Georgy Markov, from his safe perch in London, was making them a laughingstock. His voice was a poison seeping back into their perfectly controlled world. And so, a decision was made. A very old, very dark decision. The voice had to be silenced, permanently. This was not a simple matter. This was London, the capital of a major Western power. A gunshot, a stabbing. These were messy, loud affairs that would trigger a massive public investigation. They needed something different. They needed something quiet, something that mimicked nature. They needed a method that would allow the assassin to melt back into the crowd, and a cause of death that would baffle the doctors, a murder that would masquerade as a natural event. They had tried before. Markov knew he was a target. His friends had warned him. There had been attempts to poison his drink in Germany. They had failed. The DS, as they were known, were persistent, but perhaps not the most sophisticated. So they did what many smaller intelligence agencies did during the Cold War. They asked for help from their patrons, their elder brothers in Moscow. They turned to the KGB. While direct, undeniable proof remains buried in locked archives, the evidence points overwhelmingly to the involvement of the KGB's most secretive technical divisions. These were the laboratories, sometimes referred to as camera or the chamber, where the dark arts of assassination were perfected, places where science and murder became indistinguishable. They were masters of what they called special actions, and for the special action against Georgy Markov, they provided a very special tool, a solution born from the humble seed of the castor bean. Let's return to Waterloo Bridge. It is the 7th of September, 1978. Georgy Markov is on his way to work at the BBC. It's a normal day. The drone of red double-decker buses, the grey Thames flowing below, the hurried steps of Londoners on their daily commute. He is waiting at a bus stop. There are people around him. He feels a sudden, sharp sting in the back of his right thigh. It's not agonizing, more like a bee sting or a clumsy bump. He turns. A man behind him is picking up an umbrella he has just dropped. The man is heavy-set. A stranger. He mutters, "I'm sorry," in a foreign accent, hails a taxi, and disappears into the London traffic. Markov feels a dull ache, but thinks little of it. It was an accident. A clumsy tourist with an umbrella. He continues on his way, goes to his office at the BBC, and mentions the strange little incident to his colleagues. It's a curious anecdote, nothing more. But that evening, the story changes. The silent machines inside him have begun to receive their final instructions. A high fever begins to burn through him. His body aches. By nightfall, he is violently ill. He is admitted to St. James Hospital in Balham. The doctors are presented with a puzzle. Here is a healthy 49-year-old man, now desperately ill with a raging fever and a white blood cell count that is skyrocketing. The obvious diagnosis is severe infection, some form of septicemia or blood poisoning. They administer massive doses of antibiotics. But the antibiotics do nothing. Of course they do nothing. They are designed to fight bacteria, living organisms that reproduce and spread. They are useless against the saboteur that is now at work in Markov's body. The Ricin molecules, released from their microscopic prison, are doing exactly what their biology dictates. They are finding their way into his cells, latching onto the ribosomes, and methodically, irreversibly, shutting down the production of protein. Imagine the confusion of the doctors. They are fighting a ghost. They search for a pathogen, for a bacterium they can culture and identify. But there is none. All they see is the aftermath. Widespread cell death. The linings of his blood vessels, his capillaries begin to break down. It's the cascade failure we spoke of before. His blood pressure plummets. His organs, starved of proteins needed for basic function and repair, begin to fail. His liver, his kidneys, his spleen. He tells the doctors about the incident on the bridge, about the umbrella, the sting. It sounds outlandish, like the delirium of a feverish man, but he is insistent. 3 days later, Georgy Markov's heart stops. His voice is finally silenced. To the hospital, it was a deeply mysterious, tragic death from an unidentified poison. To the Bulgarian secret police, it was mission accomplished. To the world, had it not been for Markov's own insistence and the curiosity of the investigators, it might have remained just that. But the story did not end there. Because of Markov's testimony before he died, Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist branch was called in. An autopsy was ordered. The pathologists were meticulous. They examined his body with incredible care, looking for any clue, and in the tissue of his right thigh, precisely where he had felt the sting, they found it. It was an object so small it was almost unbelievable. A metallic sphere, just 1.7 millimeters in diameter. To put that in perspective, it's about the size of the head of a pin. It was made of an incredibly dense and exotic alloy, 90% platinum and 10% iridium. This was not something one accidentally gets embedded in one's leg. This was a piece of high-tech, bespoke engineering. Under a powerful microscope, the full, chilling ingenuity of the device was revealed. The tiny sphere had been drilled with 2 holes, each only 0.35 millimeters wide, creating a hollow cavity inside. This cavity was the payload bay. It was designed to hold a minuscule amount of poison, estimated to be around 450 micrograms, less than a single grain of sand. The holes were then sealed with a special type of wax, a sugar-based compound designed to do one thing: melt at the temperature of the human body. Here was the full, elegant horror of the weapon. It was a miniature, time-release assassination device, fired from a silent weapon, likely a pneumatic gun concealed within the modified umbrella. It would penetrate the skin, causing only a minor sting. The victim might not even notice. Once embedded in the warm muscle tissue, the body's own heat would melt the sugary wax seal, releasing the ricin directly into the bloodstream. It was the perfect delivery system. The metal pellet itself was made of platinum iridium, an alloy that is biologically inert. It triggers no immune response. It would simply sit there, a tiny silent monument to the murder it had committed. It was designed never to be found. The discovery of the pellet transformed the investigation. This was not a random act. This was a state-sponsored assassination of incredible sophistication, carried out on a London street in broad daylight. The media dubbed the unknown killer the Umbrella Man. The story became a sensation, a real-life spy thriller. And then, the pattern emerged. Investigators learned of another Bulgarian defector, Vladimir Kostov, who had been attacked in a similar way just 10 days before Markov on the Paris metro. He too had felt a sting. He too had developed a fever. But for some reason, the pellet that struck him had not properly embedded itself, or the wax seal was faulty. Only a tiny, non-lethal dose of the ricin had entered his system. He had survived. When French doctors, alerted by the events in London, examined his back, they found an identical platinum iridium pellet. The conspiracy was now undeniable. This was a campaign. The weapon, the poison, the targets, it all pointed back to Sofia, and by extension to Moscow. The umbrella gun itself was a ghost. No such device was ever recovered, but its design is believed to have been a masterpiece of covert engineering. A standard umbrella, modified with a silent, compressed gas mechanism in the shaft, capable of firing the tiny pellet with enough force to penetrate clothing and skin, but without making a sound louder than a soft pop. The agent could fire it, drop the umbrella as if by accident, apologize, and be gone before the victim even realized what had truly happened. The Cold War was a conflict fought not just with nuclear arsenals and divisions of tanks, but in the shadows with secrets and whispers and poisons. Ricin was the perfect Cold War weapon. It was sourced from nature, making it difficult to trace back to a state laboratory. It was incredibly potent, meaning only a microscopic amount was needed. And its action, the slow, methodical shutdown of the body's cellular machinery, beautifully mimicked a natural, if aggressive, illness. It was a weapon that aimed to erase its own existence. The case of Georgy Markov became the textbook example of this kind of attack. It was brazen, elegant, and terrifying. It sent a clear message to every dissident, every defector, every person who dared to speak out against the regimes of the Eastern Bloc. You are not safe. We can reach you anywhere. We can silence you on a crowded street in the heart of the West, and we can do it so quietly the world will barely notice. In the years and decades that followed, the case files grew thick with intelligence reports, defector testimonies, and forensic analysis. High-ranking KGB and Bulgarian intelligence officers who later defected, like Oleg Kulagin and Oleg Gordievsky, would confirm the story. They spoke of the DS request, the KGB's agreement, and the personal order from Todor Zhivkov himself, who was allegedly furious at Markov's broadcasts. But legally, the case remains frozen in time. The assassin was never identified. The architects of the plot in Sofia and Moscow died of old age or faded into obscurity after the fall of the Berlin Wall. No one was ever brought to justice for the murder of Georgy Markov. In that sense, the silence they sought was achieved. Yet the story survives. It survives as a testament to a man's courage to speak truth to power. And it survives as a chilling lesson in the dual nature of our world. It shows us how a simple plant, the castor bean, with its beautiful mottled seeds, a plant that creates one of life's most complex and deadly proteins as a simple defense against being eaten, can be taken by human hands, by human intellect, and be refined, purified, and engineered into a tool of political terror. The microscopic key, designed by nature to lock a plant-eater's cells, was copied, weaponized, and placed in a platinum vessel, to be used to turn the lock on a human life, and to silence a voice that dared to tell a story. Chapter 4. The Heisenberg Principle. Walter White's chemical signature. Or bean, with its beautiful mottled seeds, a plant that creates one of life's most complex and deadly proteins as a simple defense against being eaten, can be taken by human hands, by human intellect, and be refined, purified, and engineered into a tool of political terror. The microscopic key, designed by nature to lock a plant-eater's cells, was copied, weaponized, and placed in a platinum vessel, to be used to turn the lock on a human life, and to silence a voice that dared to tell a story. And yet, the story of this molecule, this intricate biological machine, does not end on the grand stage of international espionage. It can also be a story told in whispers, in the quiet desperation of a much smaller world, a world of beige suburban homes, dusty desert landscapes, and the sterile humming fluorescence of a chemistry lab. The story of Ricin can move from the hands of a state-sponsored assassin to the hands of a high school chemistry teacher, a man who, like the state, is looking for a quiet, elegant, and deniable solution, a way to silence a voice, not of political dissent, but of brutal, chaotic violence. For Walter White, the protagonist of this tale, Ricin was not just a weapon, it was a statement. In a world of clumsy gunfire, bloody beatings, and messy explosions, Ricin was chemistry. It was pure, it was precise, it was a reflection of his own self-image, a brilliant mind capable of wielding the fundamental laws of the universe with a quiet, terrifying precision. It was his signature, the calling card of a new kind of monster, one who kills not with rage, but with a formula. Let's follow this small, deadly vial of white powder through its journey in this story, and as we do, let's hold it up to the light of our own world to see where the fiction shines with the truth of nature and where it bends for the sake of a good story. Our first encounter with this poison is born of desperation. Walter, new to the brutal world he has entered, is faced with an adversary entirely outside his comprehension. Tuco Salamanca, a man of unpredictable meth-fueled violence. How do you fight a man like that? Walter's mind does not go to a bigger gun or a better plan of escape. It goes back to the lab. It goes to first principles. It goes to a Castor Bean. He presents his partner Jesse with a small baggie. It doesn't look like much, just a few crystals mixed in with their signature blue meth. The plan is simple, almost childishly so. They will present it to Tuco as a new product, a new chemical formulation, and when the volatile drug lord inevitably samples the product, the poison will do its work. Here, in this first move, we see the mind of the chemist. He is not just trying to kill a man, he is trying to solve an equation. But let us pause the story and ask the question he, in his arrogance, might have overlooked. Would this work? Could you poison someone by lacing a crystalline drug with ricin? The answer lies in the very nature of the molecule we have been exploring. Ricin is a protein, and proteins are, for all their complexity and power, remarkably fragile things. Think of a protein as an impossibly intricate piece of origami, folded into a very specific three-dimensional shape. Its shape is everything. The little pockets, the grooves, the protruding arms. This is what allows it to interact with other molecules, to be the key that fits a specific cellular lock. But introduce too much heat, and the delicate folds begin to tremble and then spring apart. The beautiful origami sculpture reverts to a useless, crumpled piece of paper. This process is called denaturation, and you are intimately familiar with it. It is what happens when you fry an egg. The clear, liquid egg white, full of albumin proteins, turns solid and white as the heat denatures those proteins into a tangled, useless mesh. The delivery method Walter White chose for Tuco, smoking, is a crucible of intense heat. A lighter flame burns at hundreds of degrees Celsius, far, far hotter than the simple boiling of water. If Tuco were to place these tainted crystals in a pipe and heat them, the ricin protein would be obliterated in an instant. The intricate key would be melted down into a shapeless lump of metal, utterly incapable of finding, let alone turning, the lock on his cells. Its elegant two-chain structure would be ripped apart, its function completely destroyed. From a chemical standpoint, the plan was doomed from the start. But what if Tuco chose a different method? What if he ingested it? Here the story shifts from impossible to merely improbable. Ricin is certainly lethal when swallowed, but it is far less potent than through other routes. The human digestive system is a harsh and unforgiving environment, a chemical gauntlet designed to break things down. Stomach acid and digestive enzymes would attack the ricin molecule, denaturing some of it, breaking it down before it could even have a chance to reach the intestinal walls where it could be absorbed. To be lethal through ingestion, a dose of ricin must be measured in milligrams per kilogram of body weight. For a man Tuco's size, this would mean a substantial amount of powder, not a light dusting on a few crystals, but a noticeable quantity. A few grains of salt worth, perhaps. It is plausible that Walter, in his meticulousness, prepared a dose large enough. If Tuco had swallowed that baggie, the story might have ended very differently. The symptoms would have begun hours later. A quiet, creeping misery, nausea at first, then severe abdominal pain as the poison begins its work on the lining of the gut. The ricin molecules, those that survived the stomach, would latch onto the cells of his intestines. The B chain, the grappling hook, would bind to the sugars on the cell surface. The cell, not knowing any better, would then welcome the invader inside, pulling it into a small bubble called an endosome. Inside the cell, the A chain, the true weapon, would separate. It is a microscopic saboteur released behind enemy lines. It has only one target, the ribosome. If a cell is a factory, the ribosome is its most important piece of machinery. It is the assembly line, the 3D printer that reads the genetic blueprints, the messenger RNA, and builds every single protein the cell needs to live. It builds the structural beams, the enzymes, the communication signals, everything. Without its ribosomes, the factory goes quiet. Production ceases. The cell dies. The A chain of the ricin molecule is an enzyme of almost unbelievable efficiency. It finds a ribosome, and with a single chemical snip, it permanently breaks it. A single ricin A chain can inactivate up to 1,500 ribosomes per minute. It is a silent, tireless assassin, moving through the cell's cytoplasm, shutting down the factories one by one, and the cell has no defense against it. For Tuco, this would have meant a cascade of catastrophic failure. The cells lining his digestive tract would have died first, leading to massive internal bleeding and fluid loss. This is the cause of the horrific vomiting and bloody diarrhea characteristic of ricin ingestion. As the poison was absorbed into his bloodstream, it would travel to other organs, shutting down the cellular factories in his liver, his spleen, his kidneys. Organ failure would follow, a slow, agonizing, and unstoppable process. In the story, of course, none of this comes to pass. The attempt fails not because of chemistry, but because of human chaos. But the seed has been planted. The ricin, unused, would be recovered. It would be saved. It would retreat into the shadows of the narrative, a small vial of white powder representing a promise of a clean scientific death, waiting for its next target. That vial would become a central character in its own right, a source of immense tension and suspicion, and its next proposed victim would be a man as cold and meticulous as Walter himself, Gustavo Fring. The plan this time is different, more intimate, more personal. The ricin is to be concealed in a single cigarette. Jesse is to somehow get close to Gus and find an opportunity for the man to be poisoned. The delivery system here is vague, a point of narrative hand-waving, but it allows us to explore another fascinating aspect of this molecule, the different pathways into the human body. Think of the body as a fortress. The skin is the high outer wall, nearly impenetrable to a molecule like ricin. It is not a contact poison. You cannot be harmed simply by touching it. Ingestion, as we have seen, is like trying to sneak a saboteur through the main supply gate, a heavily guarded entrance where the cargo is inspected and often destroyed. But there are other ways in. Injection, for instance, is like having a traitor open a secret door directly into the courtyard. By bypassing the body's external and digestive defenses entirely and delivering the ricin directly into the tissues or bloodstream, the required dose plummets. A dose measured in micrograms, an amount so small you could not see it with the naked eye, is enough to be lethal. This was the method used in the Georgy Markov assassination. The tiny platinum pellet fired from the umbrella delivered its microscopic cargo of ricin directly into his bloodstream. The fortress was breached with almost perfect efficiency. The cigarette plan seems to hint at two possibilities. The first, and most obvious to a viewer, is that Jesse is meant to get Gus to smoke the cigarette. As we've already discussed, this is a scientific impossibility. The heat from the burning tip would annihilate the protein, rendering it harmless. But what if the plan was more subtle? The cigarette is not a delivery system in itself, but a hiding place, a modern-day poisoner's ring. Jesse is to carry the vial, concealed within the cigarette, and at the opportune moment, slip the powder into Gus's food or drink. This returns us to the scenario of ingestion. It would be difficult, requiring immense stealth and a perfect opportunity, but it is at least chemically plausible. There is, however, a third possibility, and it is by far the most terrifying: inhalation. If ricin powder is aerosolized into fine particles, it can be breathed into the lungs. The lungs are a very different gateway into the fortress. They are not designed for defense in the way the stomach is. They are designed for efficient transfer. Their entire purpose is to allow molecules, in this case oxygen, to pass from the air into the bloodstream as quickly as possible. The walls are incredibly thin, the surface area immense. If you were to spread out the surface of your lungs, it would cover a tennis court. For a poison like ricin, this is a wide-open, unguarded entrance. If those fine particles are inhaled deep into the alveoli, the tiny air sacs where gas exchange happens, the ricin can pass into the body with horrifying efficiency. The lethal dose for inhalation is on par with injection, mere micrograms. A tiny puff of aerosolized powder, almost invisible, could deliver a fatal blow. The symptoms of inhaled ricin are different, and they begin within hours. It starts with the lungs themselves. The poison attacks the cells of the respiratory system, causing them to die. This leads to a massive inflammatory response. The lungs fill with fluid. It begins with a fever and a cough, but it rapidly progresses to severe respiratory distress. The victim is, in essence, drowning on dry land, their own body fluids filling the delicate structures of their lungs. From there, if a large enough dose was absorbed, it would spread through the body, causing the same systemic organ failure as ingestion or injection. It is a uniquely horrific way to die. Could the cigarette be part of an inhalation plan? It's hard to imagine how. It's not an efficient dispersal device for a fine powder. It would require some sort of mechanism to puff the powder into the air near Gus's face. In the world of the show, this detail is left to our imagination. The Ricin cigarette becomes a symbol, a psychological weapon more than a practical one. It represents the constant threat, the quiet knowledge that Walter White possesses this ultimate silent tool. It sits in Jesse's pack of cigarettes, a promise and a burden, a testament to how far they are willing to go. The story of this particular vial takes a sudden dark turn. It is not used on Gus. Instead, it becomes the centerpiece of one of Walter's most monstrous acts of manipulation. Jesse's girlfriend's son, a little boy named Brock, falls gravely ill. Jesse, in his panic, discovers his Ricin cigarette is missing. He puts the two facts together and concludes with horror that the boy must have found the cigarette and poisoned himself. His rage turns on Walter, who he believes is responsible. But Walter, the master manipulator, has already laid the groundwork for a different explanation. He convinces Jesse that Gus Fring must be the one who poisoned the boy, as a way of driving a wedge between Walter and Jesse, and he offers a different culprit for the poisoning, a plant that he knows is growing in Jesse's backyard. He suggests it was not Ricin at all, but lily of the valley. Here, the narrative brilliantly uses one poison to mask the presence of another, and it allows us, as students of the natural world, to admire the sheer diversity of chemical strategies that plants have evolved for their defense. For lily of the valley, Convallaria majalis, is indeed a poisonous plant. Its delicate bell-shaped white flowers and sweet perfume hide a potent chemical arsenal, but its weapon is nothing like Ricin. Lily of the valley does not produce a ribosome inactivating protein. Its defense lies in a family of molecules called cardiac glycosides. These are much smaller, simpler molecules than the sprawling protein structure of Ricin. They have a completely different target in the body and a completely different way of killing. If Ricin is a saboteur that shuts down the cell's factories, cardiac glycosides are more like a hacker that seizes control of the cell's electrical power grid. Every one of your cells, especially your nerve and muscle cells, maintains a delicate electrical balance. The cell actively pumps sodium ions out and potassium ions in, creating a voltage difference across its membrane, like a tiny biological battery. This is fundamental to life. It's what allows nerves to fire and muscles, including the most important muscle, the heart, to contract. The molecular machine responsible for maintaining this balance is called the sodium-potassium pump. Cardiac glycosides work by jamming this pump. They lock it in place, preventing it from working. With the pump disabled, sodium builds up inside the cell and the electrical balance is thrown into chaos. In the heart, this causes the muscle cells to contract more forcefully and then at higher doses erratically. The regular rhythmic beat of the heart dissolves into a useless quivering fibrillation. The heart can no longer pump blood effectively. The ultimate cause of death is cardiac arrest. The symptoms are completely different from Ricin poisoning. There would be nausea and vomiting, yes, but they would be accompanied by confusion, visual disturbances. Victims sometimes report seeing yellow-green halos around objects, and most critically, an irregular heartbeat. A doctor examining Brock would have seen signs of cardiac distress, not the systemic cellular death and organ failure caused by Ricin. In the story, Walter's deception is perfect. He knows just enough about toxicology to offer a plausible alternative. He swaps out one natural poison for another in his narrative, playing on Jesse's fear and ignorance. The ultimate reveal, of course, is that Walter was behind it all. He did not use the ricin on Brock. He used the lily of the valley, a carefully chosen poison that would make the boy sick enough to motivate Jesse, but from which he was likely to recover. The ricin cigarette was never lost. Walter had stolen it himself to plant the seed of his elaborate lie. The ricin itself, the actual vial of white powder, remained safely in his possession. It had become a phantom, a tool of psychological terror, its power amplified by its absence. It was the perfect weapon for a man who was learning that the greatest power comes not from direct violence, but from the masterful control of information and fear. The vial makes its final appearance at the very end of Walter's story. He has lost everything. He is a man with nothing left but a list of enemies and a desire to settle all accounts. And for his final act of vengeance against the woman who betrayed him and helped to destroy his empire, Lydia Rodate Quayle, he returns to his signature weapon. The setting is a simple coffee shop. The delivery system is the most elegant and insidious of all. Lydia is a creature of habit, a woman of meticulous routine. Walter knows she takes stevia in her chamomile tea. He manages, in a final, quiet meeting, to swap her stevia packet with one he has prepared, a packet containing a fatal dose of ricin. This, of all the scenarios presented in the show, is the most terrifyingly plausible. It is the perfect application of the poison, a targeted, silent and delayed execution. Lydia ingests the poison with her tea. It is tasteless, odorless. She has no idea that she has just sealed her own fate. She leaves the meeting feeling fine. Walter's final phone call to her is a chilling confirmation. She tells him she is feeling unwell, a bit fluish, and he, in his last moments, cannot resist the satisfaction of explaining the chemistry of her death to her. He informs her what he has done, that he has poisoned her with ricin, and that there is no cure. He leaves her to her fate, a slow and certain death orchestrated from beyond his own grave. Let us trace the journey of those molecules. Mixed with the stevia and dissolved in the warm tea, the ricin would have easily passed into her stomach. The dose would have been carefully calculated by Walter, more than enough to overcome the inefficiencies of the digestive tract. Hours would pass, just as the show depicts, before the first symptoms appeared. The flu-like feeling she describes is the perfect subtle onset. Then, the true horror would begin. The process we described with Tuco would unfold within her. The cellular factories in her digestive system would begin to shut down. The nausea would give way to uncontrollable vomiting and agony. The destruction of her intestinal lining would lead to massive internal bleeding. As the ricin found its way into her circulation, it would launch its silent, systematic assault on her vital organs. Her liver, her kidneys, her spleen, all would begin to fail as their cells died off, unable to produce the proteins needed to function. Doctors would be helpless. There is no cure for ricin poisoning once the molecule has entered the cells. An antidote called an antibody does exist, but it can only work in the bloodstream, intercepting the ricin molecules before they get into the cells. Once the saboteur is inside the factory, it is too late. All that can be offered is supportive care, fluids, life support, in a desperate attempt to keep the body functioning while it is being systematically dismantled from the inside out. It is a battle that, with a sufficient dose, cannot be won. Lydia's death, which happens off-screen, would have been a lonely and agonizing affair, stretching over several days. It is the clinical, detached and horrific culmination of Walter White's journey. He did not need to see it. He did not need to be there. He simply needed to set the chemical reaction in motion and trust in its inevitable result. It is the Heisenberg principle in its most perfect metaphorical form. By observing the system, by understanding it down to its fundamental molecular level, he has affected its outcome with absolute certainty. The poison, born from a humble plant, became the ultimate expression of his intellect and his monstrosity. It was quiet, it was elegant, and it was absolute. It was not the messy work of a thug. It was the final, terrible equation of a master chemist. And it reminds us that the most powerful forces in the universe are often the ones we cannot see, the intricate, beautiful, and sometimes deadly machines that operate in the silent, microscopic world all around us and within us. Chapter 5. The Domestic Threat, When Poison Comes Home. But that silent, microscopic world is not the exclusive domain of master chemists in superlabs. Walter White's brilliance was in his purity, his precision, the almost theoretical elegance of his work. He was a creature of fiction, a perfect variable in a controlled equation. The real world, however, is a much messier, much more accessible, and in some ways a much more frightening place. The intricate, beautiful, and deadly machine of the ricin molecule does not require a genius to unlock its power. It doesn't demand a multi-million-dollar laboratory. It asks only for a recipe, a handful of common seeds, and a grievance. The cold, impartial lethality of the ribosome inactivating protein is a force of nature that can be coaxed from its slumber in a garage, a basement, or a quiet kitchen by hands far less skilled and intentions far more chaotic than those of a fictional drug lord. The story of ricin, after its brief and shadowy life in the world of state-sponsored espionage, does not simply fade away. It comes home. It sheds the glamour of the Cold War spy and takes on a far more unsettling form: the disgruntled neighbor, the political extremist, the domestic terrorist. It becomes a tool for those who operate not on a global stage, but in the quiet, often overlooked corners of our own society. This is the chapter of the story where the poison seeps under the door, where the threat arrives not in a diplomatic pouch, but in a plain white envelope. Our journey into this world begins not in a gleaming lab, but in the cold, windswept landscape of rural Minnesota in the early 1990s. This was a time of rising anti-government sentiment, a period where disillusionment and paranoia festered in small, isolated groups across the country. One such group called themselves the Minnesota Patriots Council. They were not chemists or biologists. They were tax protesters, farmers, and blue-collar workers, united by a profound distrust of federal authority, particularly law enforcement. They saw the government not as a protector, but as an occupying force, and in their minds they were planning a rebellion. And for their rebellion, they sought a weapon, not a bomb, which was loud and indiscriminate, not a gun, which required a direct confrontation they were not prepared for. They wanted something quiet, something insidious, something that felt more like a righteous act of targeted removal than a messy act of violence. They wanted something they could make themselves from the land, a testament to their self-sufficiency. They chose ricin. The men involved, Douglas Baker, Leroy Wheeler, and two others, were not scientists. Their lab was a collection of mason jars, coffee filters, and household chemicals. Their source material was a batch of castor beans, ordered through a mail-order catalogue, the same kind of catalogue a gardener might use to order seeds for marigolds or tomatoes. The process they followed was likely gleaned from fringe publications, anarchist cookbooks, and extremist newsletters passed from hand to hand in the shadowy subculture of the militia movement. Imagine that scene for a moment. The air in the room, thick with the smell of acetone, a common solvent you can buy at any hardware store. The men, huddled over their work, following a crude set of instructions. They would have ground the beans into a coarse meal, a simple mechanical act, like grinding coffee. Then they would have mixed this pulp with the acetone, a process meant to strip away the castor oil, which ironically is the harmless, useful component of the seed. After this, they would have been left with a damp, fibrous mash. This mash, containing the water-soluble ricin toxin, would then be dried. The result is not the fine, white weaponized powder of cinematic lore. It is a crude, brownish, clumpy substance. Its potency is a fraction of purified ricin, unpredictable and variable. But it is still ricin. The deadly molecule is still there, nestled within the crude protein mixture, waiting. The members of the Patriots Council believed they had created a weapon of immense power. They mixed their crude ricin with dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO, a solvent with a peculiar and dangerous property. It can be absorbed directly through the skin, carrying other chemicals along with it. Their plan was as chilling as it was crude. They intended to smear this toxic paste on the door handles of a deputy U.S. Marshal's vehicle and perhaps on the doors of other local law enforcement officials. The idea was that the marshal would touch the handle, the DMSO would carry the ricin through his skin, and he would simply go away. A quiet, untraceable death. A warning to the federal government. It is a plan born from a fundamental misunderstanding of the poison they were trying to wield. While DMSO can enhance skin absorption for some substances, ricin is a large protein molecule. It is not easily ferried through the protective barrier of the epidermis. The plan was, from a toxicological standpoint, deeply flawed. It was far more likely to fail than to succeed. But the intent, the cold-blooded methodical plotting, was absolute. The poison they had created in their mason jars might have been crude, but the malice was pure. They were not caught by a brilliant forensic scientist or a high-tech surveillance network. They were undone by something far more common, human nature. A member of their own circle, a man who had attended their meetings, became an informant for the FBI. He wore a wire, recording their conversations, capturing their boasts about the poison they had cooked up, their chillingly casual discussions of who they would target and how. When the FBI raided the home of Douglas Baker, they found it. Tucked away in a canning jar, hidden in a coffee can, was the gritty off-white powder. The agents who handled it did so with the utmost care, sealed in protective suits, because while the plan to use it was amateurish, the substance itself was not a joke. It was sent to a specialized lab for confirmation. The tests came back positive. It was ricin. The case of the Minnesota Patriots Council was a landmark. It was one of the first successful prosecutions under the Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989. It served as a stark, early warning that the threat of bioterrorism was not just a foreign concern. It was here, being brewed in the heartland, by American citizens, driven by ideologies that grew from American soil. The men were sentenced to prison, their plot thwarted before it could be tested. We will never know if their crude poison would have worked as they intended. But the barrier between a dark thought and a weapon of mass destruction had been proven to be terrifyingly thin. It was the thickness of a mason jar, the page of a catalogue, the quiet resentment simmering in a neighbor's house. This case cracked open a door into a new and frightening landscape. The idea that common plants could be turned into weapons by ideologues was no longer a theoretical threat. It was a reality. And as the years went on, the methods would change. The motivations would vary, but the poison of choice so often would remain the same. The quiet, elegant machinery of the Castor Bean had found a new and deeply unsettling market. The plot in Minnesota was a plan for targeted assassination, a weapon meant for a specific person. But the story of Ricin's domestic journey would soon evolve. It would become a tool not just for killing, but for terrorizing. It would move from a paste smeared on a door handle to a powder sealed in an envelope, a threat aimed not just at an individual but at the very heart of our institutions. This brings us to the spring of 2013. The memory of the 2001 anthrax attacks was still a very real and traumatic part of the American psyche. The idea that the mail system, that most mundane and trusted part of daily life, could be a conduit for a deadly biological agent had changed everything. It had led to the creation of vast, sophisticated mail screening facilities, industrial-scale operations where letters and packages sent to high-profile government addresses were irradiated, tested, and vetted before they ever reached their intended recipient. It was a massive, expensive, and largely invisible shield built to protect against a threat the public rarely thought about. In April of 2013, that shield was tested. At a mail screening facility in Maryland, a complex designed to handle mail addressed to the White House and Capitol Hill, an alarm was triggered. A letter, addressed to United States Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, had tested positive for a suspicious substance. The facility went into lockdown. Protocols drilled and rehearsed countless times were initiated. The letter was carefully isolated. Hazmat teams, figures encased in the otherworldly plastic of their protective suits, moved with a calm, deliberate precision. The substance inside was subjected to a battery of field tests. The results came back, again and again, with the same chilling confirmation: Ricin. Soon after, the nation held its breath. News channels broadcast the story in urgent, breaking tones. The spectre of bioterrorism, which had laid dormant for years, was suddenly reawakened. Who was behind this? Was it a foreign power? A sophisticated terror cell? The country's most powerful investigative agencies, led by the FBI, descended on the case. The letters themselves were the primary evidence. They were not elaborate. They were simple, typed messages, filled with a strange, rambling prose. They contained phrases like, "To see a wrong and not expose it is to become a silent partner to its continuance," and they were all signed, "I am KC and I approve this message." The investigation, at first, seemed to move with incredible speed. The initials KC and the Mississippi connection led authorities to a man named Paul Kevin Curtis, a professional Elvis impersonator from Boonville, Mississippi. Curtis was known locally for his eccentric behavior and for an ongoing bitter feud with a local politician, which he had documented extensively online. His writings and videos were filled with the same sort of paranoid, conspiracy-laden language found in the letters. The case seemed to be closing in. Curtis was arrested, and his face was plastered across every news network. He was, for a moment, the face of this new wave of bioterror. But as investigators dug deeper, the story began to unravel. Curtis insisted on his innocence, claiming he had been framed, and the forensic evidence began to point away from him. There were no traces of ricin or the components needed to make it at his home or on his computers. Something was wrong. The narrative was too neat, too simple. The real clue lay not just in what was in the letters, but what was on them. Forensic specialists at the FBI laboratory in Quantico, a place where science is used to give voice to silent evidence, began a microscopic examination. They analyzed the dust on the letters, the adhesive on the stamps, the paper fibers themselves, and they found something. On the threatening letter sent to President Obama, and on the other letters, they found faint impressions, what are known as dust prints. These are the ghostly traces of whatever the paper was resting on when it was written or handled. By carefully enhancing these images, they could make out patterns and words from other documents. At the same time, investigators were re-examining Kevin Curtis's claims that he was being framed. He had spoken of a long-running feud with another man, a local martial arts instructor and musician named James Everett Dutschke. The two men had a complicated and hostile history. Dutschke had also run for political office and lost, and he harbored deep resentments. The FBI turned its full attention to Dutschke. They executed a search warrant on his former martial arts studio in Tupelo, Mississippi. And there, in a dusty trash can, they found the missing pieces of the puzzle. They found the original document, whose dust prints had been lifted from the ricin letters. They found a dust mask, which later tested positive for ricin. They searched his computers, and the digital ghost trail was undeniable. They found search histories for how to make ricin. They found articles about the castor plant. They found that he had purchased castor beans online, using a PayPal account. The pieces snapped into place, forming a picture not of a sophisticated terrorist, but of a man consumed by a petty personal grudge, who was willing to deploy a weapon of mass destruction and frame an innocent man to settle a score. Dutschke's Ricin was, like the Minnesota Patriots Council's, a crude homemade preparation. He had followed a recipe found online, grinding the beans, using a coffee grinder he later discarded, and performing a simple chemical extraction. The amount in each letter was small, and its purity was low. It was likely not potent enough to have caused a fatality simply by being opened, though direct ingestion or inhalation would have been another matter entirely. But the power of his weapon was not solely in its toxicology. Its power was in the fear it generated. For a few tense days he had held the attention of the nation, disrupted the functions of government, and sent a wave of anxiety through the public. He had turned a handful of seeds and a personal vendetta into a national security incident. James Everett Dutchker was arrested and eventually pleaded guilty, sentenced to 25 years in prison. Kevin Curtis, the Elvis impersonator, was exonerated and released, his life turned upside down by the false accusation. The 2013 Ricin letters case was a chilling illustration of what we might call the democratization of terror. The materials were cheap and legal. The instructions were a few clicks away. And the motivation wasn't a grand political ideology, but a bitter personal feud. The case revealed that the profile of a bioterrorist wasn't necessarily a wild-eyed fanatic in a cave on the other side of the world. It could be the man down the street, stewing in his own private resentments, with a credit card and an internet connection. This accessibility has led to a disturbing number of smaller, but no less serious, incidents over the years. Lone actors, disconnected from any larger group, have been drawn to the dark allure of this poison. There was the case of a woman in Texas who sent ricin-laced letters to President Obama and Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York, motivated by anger over gun control laws. She, too, had learned how to make it online, and she tried to frame her estranged husband for the crime. There have been plots involving disgruntled employees, individuals seeking to extort money, and people simply fascinated by the idea of wielding such a hidden power. In each of these cases, the pattern is remarkably similar. The perpetrator is often isolated, nursing a deep-seated grievance. They are not master criminals. Their methods are often clumsy, their operational security non-existent. They leave digital fingerprints all over their online research. They buy the beans with their own credit cards. They often talk, or boast, or leave a trail that a competent investigation can easily follow. They are drawn to ricin, not because they are chemists, but precisely because they are not. It offers the illusion of scientific sophistication without requiring any real expertise. It feels like a secret, powerful knowledge that sets them apart. And this brings us to a fundamental question. What is it about poison, and ricin in particular, that attracts this specific kind of individual? Why choose this silent, patient method over a gun, a knife, or a bomb? To understand this, we have to step away from the chemistry and the case files and enter the unsettling world of human psychology. The poisoner, throughout history, has occupied a unique and sinister niche in the catalogue of human violence. A person who uses a gun or a knife acts directly. Their violence is immediate, confrontational, and visceral. It requires a certain kind of courage, however perverse. The act is loud, messy, and undeniable. The bomber, similarly, acts in a moment of explosive, chaotic finality. The poisoner is different. Theirs is a crime of intimacy and distance, all at once. It often requires close access to the victim, the ability to introduce the substance into their food, their drink, their environment. Yet the act of killing itself is remote. The poisoner is not there when the life ebbs away. They can be miles away, or sitting in the next room feigning concern, while the tiny molecular machines they have set in motion do their work. It is the ultimate act of passive aggression, a murder committed by proxy. This method appeals to a personality that craves control but fears confrontation. It is often described as a weapon of the weak, but that is perhaps too simplistic. It is more accurately the weapon of the arrogant and the cowardly. The poisoner sees themselves not as a brutish killer, but as a clever manipulator, an intellectual who outsmarts their victim and society itself. They are playing a game of chess, while everyone else is playing a cruder game. Walter White, in the fictional world, embodied the apex of this archetype, the brilliant mind using chemistry as the ultimate expression of his power. Real-world poisoners often share this same sense of intellectual vanity, even when their actual skills are, as we've seen, dangerously rudimentary. They are performing a kind of dark alchemy, taking something mundane and transforming it into a source of absolute power. The act of cooking the ricin, of following the steps, is a ritual that reinforces this self-perception. They are not merely angry, they are becoming a scientist, a secret agent, a force to be reckoned with. They are mastering a hidden art. Furthermore, poison allows for a delay, a period of anticipation that can be a source of profound psychological gratification for the perpetrator. They have set a process in motion, and now they can simply watch it unfold. They can observe the victim's decline, the confusion of doctors, the distress of family members, all while holding the secret knowledge of the cause. It is an exercise in absolute godlike power over another person's fate. Ricin, specifically, fits this psychological profile perfectly. It is famously, almost mythically, potent. Its association with spies and assassins lends it a certain mystique. And crucially, its ingredients are disarmingly ordinary. The Castor Bean plant, Ricinus communis, is a common ornamental. It's grown in gardens and parks around the world for its dramatic, tropical-looking foliage. It is beautiful. This duality is powerfully seductive to the poisoner's mindset, the ability to extract a deadly secret from a beautiful, everyday object. It reinforces their feeling of being special, of seeing a hidden reality that others miss. They aren't just committing a crime, they are revealing a hidden truth about the world that death can hide in plain sight in the flowerbed next door. The symptoms of ricin poisoning also contribute to its appeal for this personality type. The initial effects, nausea, vomiting, internal bleeding, can mimic a severe naturally occurring illness. It creates a period of diagnostic confusion, a medical mystery that the poisoner can observe with a sense of detached intellectual superiority. They know the answer that eludes even the doctors. So when we look at the cases of the Minnesota Patriots Council, of James Everett Dutchke, and of the many other lone actors, we see this psychology at play. They were individuals who felt powerless and overlooked. They harbored deep resentments against a system or individuals they felt had wronged them. And in a handful of castor beans they found a way to become powerful. They found a weapon that allowed them to act on their rage from a safe distance, a weapon that made them feel clever, sophisticated, and in control. The poison wasn't just a tool to kill or terrorize, it was a balm for a wounded ego. But for every action there is a reaction. For every individual plotting in a garage with a coffee grinder and a bag of seeds, there is a vast, complex, and incredibly dedicated system designed to stand against them. The story of domestic ricin threats is not just a story of the perpetrators, it is also the story of the protectors. It is a story of a quiet, unseen army of scientists, agents, and public health officials who have built a shield to defend against this very specific kind of threat. To understand this shield, we must travel back to that male screening facility in Maryland in 2013. When that initial alarm went off, it set in motion a chain of events, a cascade of responses that represents one of the most remarkable and least understood public safety networks in the world. The first step is detection. Since the 2001 anthrax attacks, high-risk mail streams have been subjected to a process that would seem like science fiction to an outsider. Machines can literally sniff the air around letters for biological particles, using sophisticated sensors to identify potential threats in real time. When a presumptive positive, like the one on the letter to Senator Wicker, is found, the process escalates. The sample doesn't just go to a single lab, it enters a tiered system known as the Laboratory Response Network, or LRN. This is a nationwide web of local, state, and federal laboratories, coordinated by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. The idea is to have a standardized rapid response capability distributed across the entire country. A sentinel lab, perhaps at a local public health department, might perform the initial confirmatory tests. These are labs that are part of our everyday public health infrastructure, the same places that test for influenza or foodborne illnesses, but they are specially trained and equipped to handle potential bioterror agents safely. They use techniques like polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, a method that can detect the specific genetic signature of the organism, or in the case of a toxin like ricin, the DNA of the castor bean plant from which it was derived. If the local lab confirms the threat, the sample is then securely transported, under a strict chain of custody, to one of the LRN's reference or national laboratories. These are the major leagues. This includes the CDC labs in Atlanta or the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRID, at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Here, in biosafety level 3 and 4 facilities, the highest levels of biocontainment, scientists in full-body pressurized suits perform the definitive analysis. Imagine the quiet hum of the air filtration systems in one of these labs. The scientist works within a biological safety cabinet, a sterile box with a glass shield, their hands in thick rubber gloves. Every movement is slow, deliberate, precise. They are not just confirming the presence of ricin, they are characterizing it. How pure is it? What is the particle size? Are there any other substances mixed with it? This information is not just academically interesting, it is crucial forensic intelligence for the FBI. It can tell them about the skill level of the person who made it, and perhaps even point to the specific method they used, providing clues to narrow down the search. While the scientists are working, another part of the system is moving in parallel. The FBI's Weapons of Mass Destruction Directorate takes the lead on the criminal investigation. This is a specialized unit created to bridge the gap between law enforcement and science. Their agents are trained not just in investigation, but in chemistry, biology, and radiological physics. They understand the threats they are hunting. They work the case like any other, but with a unique set of challenges. The crime scene itself is hazardous. Collecting evidence, like the letters sent by Duchka, requires a hazmat team. Every item must be carefully bagged, sealed, and decontaminated before it can even be sent to the forensic lab. The investigators then begin the painstaking work of piecing together the trail. They analyze the postmarks to determine where the letters were mailed from. They examine the handwriting, the paper, the ink, and as we saw in the Duchka case, they use advanced forensic techniques to pull latent clues, like dust prints, from the evidence itself. Simultaneously, the public health response is underway. The CDC and local health departments work to identify anyone who may have been exposed, like the postal workers who handled the letters or the staff who opened them. They are monitored for symptoms. Hospitals are put on alert, provided with information on how to recognize and treat ricin exposure. An entire system, designed to contain both the poison and the panic, clicks into place. This response is a quiet, incredibly complex and beautifully coordinated dance. It involves hundreds, sometimes thousands of people across dozens of agencies, from the local fire department hazmat team to the most advanced BSL-4 laboratory in the country. It is a system built on the hard-won lessons of past attacks. It is methodical, it is patient, and it is relentless. And it is a system that is humbling to contemplate. We live our lives largely unaware of its existence. We see a scary headline on the news about a ricin letter, and then a few days later we see another headline about an arrest. We miss the enormous, intricate effort that happens in between. We miss the image of the postal worker who first spots the suspicious package, the scientist working late into the night under the bright, sterile lights of the lab, the FBI agent meticulously piecing together a digital trail of breadcrumbs left by a suspect. This is the other side of the story of domestic bioterror. For every act of hatred and chaos, there is a counter-movement of order, diligence and care. For every person who tries to turn the elegant machinery of nature into a weapon, there is an army of others using the elegant machinery of science to protect. When we place these two worlds side by side, the lonely, resentful plotter in their basement, and the vast interconnected network of responders, we see the true asymmetry of this threat. It takes very little to create the poison: a handful of seeds, a recipe from the internet, a heart full of grievance. But it takes an immense collective and societal effort to defend against it. The ease of production is pitted against the complexity of protection. And so we are left with the plant itself. Ricinus communis. It continues to grow in gardens and along roadsides, indifferent to the human dramas that swirl around its potent chemistry. Its leaves are still beautiful, its seeds still intricate. It is a living thing, a product of millions of years of evolution, a masterpiece of biological engineering. It has no malice, It has no intent. It simply is. It produces ricin not to be a weapon, but as a defense, a way to protect its own seeds from being eaten, a way to ensure its own future. The poison, then, is not in the plant. The poison is in the human heart. It is the resentment, the ideology, the hatred that seeks out a tool to express itself. The castor bean plant merely offers up one of nature's most efficient creations, and from time to time, a human hand reaches out and takes it, hoping to borrow its quiet, absolute power for their own dark and messy purposes. The story of domestic ricin is a reminder that the most dangerous threats sometimes come not from faraway lands, but from within, and that the ongoing battle against them is fought not always on a battlefield, but in laboratories, in mailrooms, and in the patient, meticulous work of those who have dedicated their lives to standing guard in the quiet spaces, watching for the moment when poison comes home. Chapter 6. The Race Against Time. Forensics and the futile search for a cure. And so, the poison has come home. The quiet act of malice is complete. A tiny amount of unassuming white powder, the ghost of a vibrant seed, has found its way into a human life. The story does not end here. In many ways, it has just begun. For now, a new chapter opens, one that unfolds not in gardens or clandestine labs, but in the sterile, brightly lit corridors of an emergency room, and in the silent, methodical world of the forensic scientist. A story told in two parts: the desperate, biological race to save a life, and the patient, molecular hunt for the truth. It begins, as the most insidious things often do, with a whisper, not a bang. A person feels unwell. There's a cough, perhaps a low-grade fever, a sense of nausea, maybe some muscle aches. It is the universal vocabulary of sickness, the body's common complaint against 1,000 different invaders. They might think it's the flu, or food poisoning, something to be weathered with rest and fluids. They would have no reason to suspect that a profound and irreversible sabotage is already underway, happening on a scale so small it is almost beyond comprehension. This is the first great tactical advantage of ricin, its utter anonymity. It wears the perfect camouflage, mimicking the symptoms of illnesses we encounter every day. In the critical first hours, when intervention might matter most, there is no clear sign, no blaring alarm to signal the specific nature of the threat. A doctor examining the patient sees a familiar constellation of symptoms. They listen to the lungs, check the fever, ask about recent meals. There is nothing yet to suggest that the patient is not fighting a common virus, but is instead the victim of one of the most potent and efficient protein synthesis inhibitors known to science. While the conscious mind registers only a vague malaise, inside, at the very heart of the body's machinery, a silent invasion is proceeding with breathtaking speed and precision. Let's travel down, past the skin, past the muscle, into the bloodstream, and follow a single molecule of ricin on its journey. We find ourselves in the bustling metropolis of the cellular world. Here, trillions of cells work in concert, each one a tiny, self-contained city, complete with power plants, communication networks, and most importantly, factories. These factories are the ribosomes, and their sole, ceaseless task is to build proteins. Proteins are everything. They are the bricks and mortar of our bodies, the enzymes that digest our food, the antibodies that fight infection, the hemoglobin that carries our oxygen. The ribosome is the 3D printer of life, reading instructions from our DNA and assembling, piece by piece, the complex molecules that allow us to exist. This process is so fundamental, so constant, that we are never aware of it. It is the hum of existence itself. And it is this hum that ricin has come to silence. The ricin molecule arrives like a Trojan horse. It's made of two parts, two protein chains linked together, known as the A chain and the B chain. Think of the B chain as a master key, a skeleton key, capable of unlocking the doors to a vast number of different cells in the body. It drifts through the bloodstream until it bumps against the outer wall of a cell. It probes the surface, searching for certain sugars that dot the cellular membrane like docking ports. When it finds one, it latches on. The cell, in its constant process of bringing in nutrients, doesn't recognize the danger. It sees a molecule docked at its surface and does what it's programmed to do. It envelops it, pulling it inside in a small bubble called an endosome. The horse is now within the city walls. Once inside, the molecule undergoes a transformation. The cell's internal environment causes the A chain, the saboteur, to separate from the B chain, the key. The key has done its job. It is no longer needed. The A chain is now free, a ghost in the machine, and it has one single, incredibly specific target, the ribosome. It navigates the complex cytoplasm and finds one of the city's countless protein factories, and here it performs an act of molecular surgery that is both elegant and devastating. The ribosome is a massive, complex structure made of RNA and proteins. The A chain doesn't destroy it. It doesn't blow it up. Its method is far more subtle. It targets a single critical spot in the ribosome's RNA scaffolding, a location so vital that without it, the entire machine ceases to function. With the precision of a master artisan, it clips one single chemical bond. 1. The effect is immediate and absolute. The ribosome is not broken in a way that can be easily repaired. It is fundamentally and permanently disabled. The 3D printer has had its main control wire snipped. It can still receive instructions from the DNA. The blueprints still arrive, but it can no longer read them. It can no longer assemble proteins. It has gone silent. And then, the most terrifying part. The A chain, having completed its task, is not consumed in the process. It is an enzyme, a catalyst. It releases the now dead ribosome and simply moves on to the next, and the next, and the next. A single A chain can inactivate thousands of ribosomes per minute, cutting a silent, systematic path of destruction through the cell's most vital industry. Now, multiply this by the trillions of molecules in a lethal dose, across the body, in the lungs, the liver, the kidneys, the spleen. This same quiet sabotage is happening simultaneously. It is an attack on the very foundation of biological function. The cells, unable to produce the proteins needed for their own repair and maintenance, begin to die. This is the point where the patient's symptoms begin to escalate, where the vague, flu-like feelings give way to a terrifying reality. The specific symptoms depend entirely on the route of exposure. If the ricin was inhaled, the primary battleground is the lungs, the cells lining the alveoli. The delicate air sacs where oxygen enters the blood are the first to die. As they break down, the barrier between the air and the bloodstream dissolves. Fluid from the capillaries begins to leak into the lungs. This is pulmonary edema. For the patient, it feels like drowning, slowly from the inside out. Their breathing becomes labored, ragged. A cough is no longer just a cough. It is the body's desperate, failing attempt to clear airways that are filling with its own fluid. The blood is starved of oxygen, and a bluish tint, cyanosis, may appear on the lips and fingertips. If the poison was ingested, the assault begins in the gut. The cells lining the stomach and intestines are savaged. This leads to excruciating abdominal pain, vomiting, and severe, often bloody diarrhea. The body loses massive amounts of fluid, leading to dehydration and a dangerous drop in blood pressure. The circulatory system begins to collapse, a condition known as shock. The dying intestinal cells allow the ricin that wasn't destroyed by stomach acid to enter the bloodstream, from where it can travel to the rest of the body's organs. Whether inhaled or ingested, the final act is the same. The ricin that enters the systemic circulation is carried to the liver, the kidneys, and the spleen. These organs, which are responsible for filtering the blood and managing the body's metabolism, are subjected to the same ribosomal shutdown. Their cells die en masse. The liver, the body's great chemical processing plant, fails. The kidneys, the intricate filtration system, cease to function. Widespread, multi-organ failure begins. By now, the doctors in the intensive care unit know they are not dealing with the flu, but it is often too late. This brings us to the second tragedy of ricin, the futility of the cure. By the time a patient presents with severe symptoms, the damage is already done. The saboteur, the Ricin A chain, has already disabled millions upon millions of ribosomes. The cells are already dying. There is no magic pill, no antidote that can reverse this. You cannot unclip that single severed bond in the ribosome. You cannot restart a factory that has been fundamentally broken. You cannot restart a factory that has been fundamentally broken. The treatment, therefore, is not a cure but a desperate campaign of support. It is a testament to the resilience of the human body and the dedication of medical professionals. They can give the patient oxygen to help their struggling lungs. They can administer intravenous fluids to combat dehydration and shock. They can use medications to try and support a failing blood pressure. They can even put the patient on dialysis to do the work of the failing kidneys. They are in essence trying to manually perform the functions of the dying organs, hoping against hope to keep the body alive long enough for it to perhaps generate new cells to replace the ones that have been lost. But it's a race against a cascade of failure. The cellular death is too widespread, too rapid. The damage is too profound. There is no way to neutralize the ricin that is already inside the cells. The poison has done its work and moved on, leaving a landscape of silent factories in its wake. This is why ricin is so feared. Its lethality lies not just in its potency, but in its irreversibility. The medical community, of course, does not accept this futility. In laboratories around the world, the quiet work continues on two main fronts: antitoxins and vaccines. An antitoxin is not a cure in the traditional sense. It's a collection of antibodies, proteins designed to specifically recognize and bind to the ricin molecule. If administered quickly enough after exposure, before the ricin has a chance to enter the body's cells, an antitoxin could theoretically intercept it. It would act like a security detail, surrounding the Trojan horse and flagging it for destruction by the immune system before it can ever reach the city walls. The challenge is time. The window of opportunity is incredibly small. A vaccine offers a different kind of hope: prevention. A ricin vaccine would work by showing the body's immune system a harmless piece of the ricin molecule, for instance, a modified, non-toxic version of the A chain or B chain. This would train the immune system to recognize the real threat. Then if the person were ever exposed to actual ricin, their body would already have a pre-made army of antibodies ready to neutralize it instantly. Such a vaccine would be invaluable for military personnel, first responders, and researchers who might be at risk of exposure. Research is promising, but the path from the laboratory to a widely available vaccine is long and arduous. For now, in the stark reality of the present, when the medical battle is lost, a different kind of work begins. The focus shifts from saving a life to finding a reason, to seeking justice. The body, once a patient, becomes a silent witness, and the race against time continues, but now it is a forensic race, a hunt for the molecular ghost left behind. The forensic investigation of a suspected ricin poisoning is a puzzle with vanishing pieces. Unlike heavy metals like arsenic, which can linger in the hair and bones for centuries, ricin is a protein. It is a biological molecule, and like all biological molecules, it degrades. Heat, light, and the body's own decomposition processes begin to break it down. The investigators are fighting against the natural tendency of things to return to simpler components. They are looking for a complex, three-dimensional structure that is slowly, inexorably falling apart. The first step is collecting samples. Forensic toxicologists will take samples of blood, urine, and tissue from the organs most likely to be affected: the lungs, liver, kidneys. If the poison was ingested, they will examine the contents of the stomach. But they are not looking for the poison in the way one might look for alcohol or prescription drugs. They are looking for something that exists in extraordinarily small quantities and may already be partially degraded. The primary tool in this search is the immunoassay, most commonly a technique called ELISA, which stands for enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. If the ricin molecule is the lock, then ELISA is a method for creating a perfect, custom-made key. Scientists produce highly specific antibodies that are engineered to bind only to the ricin protein and nothing else. Imagine a petri dish coated with these antibodies, these custom-made molecular traps. A sample of tissue or blood from the victim is prepared and washed over this surface. If any ricin molecules are present, they will be caught by the antibodies, sticking to the surface of the dish while everything else is washed away. Then a second antibody is added. This one also binds to ricin, but it has a tiny enzyme attached to it, like a flag. When a final chemical is added, this enzyme causes a color change, a blue or yellow signal. The intensity of the color can even tell the scientists how much ricin was present. It is a beautiful, elegant method, a way of using the body's own defense mechanisms, antibodies, as a tool for detection. It is sensitive, specific, and the gold standard for identifying ricin in biological samples. But what if the protein has degraded too much? What if the immunoassay comes back negative, but suspicion remains high? There is another, even more sensitive path to follow. Every castor bean plant has DNA, and the recipe for making the ricin protein is encoded in that DNA, in a specific gene. Even if the ricin protein itself is gone, investigators can look for the genetic blueprint. This is where a technique called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction, comes into play. If ELISA is a molecular trap, PCR is a molecular photocopier. Investigators can take a sample from the crime scene, perhaps a residue on a letter or a trace of powder on a container, and search for DNA from the castor bean plant, Ricinus communis. They use tiny pieces of synthetic DNA called primers that are designed to match and bind to a unique sequence found only in the ricin gene. Once the primers find their target, the PCR machine works its magic. It heats and cools the sample in cycles, and with each cycle, the targeted DNA segment is duplicated. One copy becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, and so on. After 30 or 40 cycles, a single invisible strand of DNA can be amplified into billions of copies, more than enough to be detected and identified. It is an astonishingly powerful technique. It's like finding a single torn page from a suspect's notebook at a crime scene and being able to photocopy it 1 billion times to prove without a doubt that the entire notebook was there. These techniques, ELISA and PCR, are the twin pillars of ricin forensics. They allow investigators to find a needle in a biological haystack, to identify a substance that is invisible, odorless, and tasteless. But finding the poison is only the beginning of the legal challenge. The next step is to trace it back to a source. Investigators might look for castor beans or evidence of a home lab. They might find grinders, filters, and chemical solvents like acetone. The presence of these items, combined with the detection of ricin, begins to build a powerful circumstantial case. Every step of the process, from grinding the beans to extracting the protein, leaves a trace, a forensic signature. And then there is the final, most difficult piece of the puzzle, proving intent. The castor bean plant is, after all, a common ornamental. A person can legally buy the seeds. They can grow the plant in their garden. The defense in a ricin case will almost always be that the materials were for a legitimate purpose, or that any ricin produced was an accidental byproduct of some other process, like trying to make castor oil at home, a process which, if done correctly, actually denatures and destroys the ricin. This is where the meticulous work of the forensic team becomes paramount. They must demonstrate a level of purity and concentration that is inconsistent with an accident. They must show evidence of a deliberate process of extraction and refinement. They must link the specific ricin found in the victim to the materials found in the suspect's possession. It is a painstaking process of connecting microscopic dots, of building a chain of evidence, molecule by molecule, from the garden to the lab to the victim. It is a quiet, often thankless battle. It is fought under microscopes and in the sterile glow of a laboratory, long after the chaos of the emergency room has subsided. It's a race not just against the clock of chemical degradation, but against the fading of memory and the muddying of trails. The scientists who perform this work are the guardians of the story's end. They give a voice to the silent witness, turning molecules into testimony, and ensuring that even a poison designed for anonymity cannot escape the patient, persistent gaze of science. The story of Ricin, from the cellular sabotage to the forensic hunt, is a profound reminder of a fundamental duality in nature. The same biological ingenuity that creates the building blocks of life can be turned, with breathtaking efficiency, into a tool of its destruction. The very processes that fill our world with wonder, the elegance of protein synthesis, the specificity of enzymes, are the same processes that make this poison so perfect in its terrible design. And our struggle to understand it, to combat it, and to bring its users to justice is a testament to our own ingenuity, our ability to peer into the invisible world, to understand its intricate rules, and to use that knowledge to stand guard, to protect, and to seek the truth in the quiet spaces where life and death are decided, one molecule at a time. Chapter 7. An Uneasy Harvest, the Global Castor Economy and Modern Bioterror. And so, we pull back from that intimate molecular stage. We zoom out from the single ribosome frozen in its tracks, from the last gasp of a dying cell, and we ascend. We leave behind the quiet spaces where life and death are decided, and we rise, up through the tissues, past the organs, through the skin of our own human-scale concerns, and into the vast, sprawling, interconnected world of us. A world of shipping lanes and stock markets, of factories and farms, of international treaties and whispered threats. Because the story of Ricin, the story of this perfect poison, doesn't end inside the cell. In fact, that is merely where its most sinister chapter begins. The broader story, the story of the plant that makes it, Ricinus communis, is a story of a profound and deeply uneasy relationship that we as a species have with the natural world. It is the story of an ancient partnership and a modern terror, of a global economic engine and a persistent, shadowy threat. It is the story of a harvest, reaped by humanity for millennia, that is at once a blessing and a curse. This is the great paradox of the Castor Bean. While one part of our collective mind, our security agencies, our public health officials, our storytellers, is fixated on the exquisitely lethal protein locked within its seed, another, much larger part of our world is utterly dependent on everything else that seed has to offer. For every gram of ricin that has ever been weaponized, or even imagined as a weapon, countless tons of its benign counterpart, castor oil, have greased the wheels of progress, soothed our skin, and even helped build the modern world around us. This plant, the source of so much fear, is also one of the great unsung workhorses of global industry. To understand this strange duality, we have to travel to the vast, sun-drenched fields of Gujarat in India, which is the undisputed king of the global castor market, producing the overwhelming majority of the world's supply. Picture it, row upon row of these sturdy shrub-like plants, their broad palmate leaves, like giant green hands reaching for the sky, and clustered near the stems, the spiky, alien-looking seed pods, blushing from green to reddish-brown as they ripen. For the farmers who walk these fields, this is not a source of bioterror. This is their livelihood. This is a crop destined for 1,000 different futures, none of them overtly sinister. The harvest is a familiar ritual. The spiny capsules are gathered, dried until they split open, and the mottled, beautiful tick-like seeds inside are collected. And here, in the industrial presses of the world, the first and most critical separation happens. The seeds are subjected to immense pressure. They are crushed, and from them flows a thick, viscous, pale yellow liquid. This is castor oil. It is a substance humanity has known for at least 6,000 years. We have found castor seeds in ancient Egyptian tombs, and the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in existence, describes its use as a therapeutic laxative, a purpose for which it is still known, if less celebrated today. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew it. They burned it in their lamps, a clean, slow-burning fuel to light their homes. For millennia, this was the plant's primary relationship with us, a humble, if sometimes aggressive medicine and a source of light. But the true genius of castor oil, the reason it became a global commodity, lies in its unique chemistry. Most vegetable oils are, chemically speaking, fairly similar. They are triglycerides, composed of a glycerol backbone attached to 3 fatty acid chains. But castor oil is different. About 90% of its fatty acid content is something called ricinoleic acid, and this molecule is special. It has a hydroxyl group, an extra oxygen and hydrogen atom dangling off its carbon chain, right in the middle. To a chemist, this is a game changer. That one little functional group, that tiny molecular appendage, acts like a handle. It makes the oil polar, allowing it to mix with things other oils can't. It allows chemists to use it as a starting point, a building block, for an incredible array of other chemical compounds. But even in its raw form, this unique structure gives castor oil a set of physical properties that make it almost irreplaceable in certain industries. It has a remarkably stable viscosity across a wide range of temperatures. While other oils get thin and watery when hot, or thick and sludgy when cold, castor oil just endures. It maintains its lubricating power under extreme conditions, and so we find it in the most demanding places imaginable. Think of the engine of a high-performance race car, or the deafening roar of a jet turbine. The temperatures and pressures in these environments are immense, capable of tearing lesser lubricants apart. But castor oil and its derivatives holds up. It provides a slick, persistent film that prevents metal from grinding against metal, a quiet hero in a world of extreme stress. It was the lubricant of choice for the Allied aircraft of World War I, and its legacy as a high-performance oil continues to this day. It is, in a very real sense, the substance that allows our most powerful machines to function without destroying themselves. But its utility extends far beyond the high-octane world of engines. That same viscous, soothing quality finds a home in a place much closer to you, perhaps on your bathroom counter right now. Castor oil is a master of moisturization, a key ingredient in an astonishing number of cosmetics and personal care products. Look at the ingredients on a tube of lipstick. That smooth, gliding texture, that subtle shine. Very often, that is the work of castor oil. In lotions and creams, it acts as a humectant, drawing moisture from the air to the skin. In soaps, it helps create a rich, creamy and stable lather. It is the quiet, unsung ingredient that gives so many of our daily products their pleasing texture and feel. It's a bit of ancient botany, packaged in modern plastic, meant to make our lives a little smoother, a little softer. And it does this work silently and efficiently in millions of homes every single day. The strange journey of this plant-based oil doesn't stop there. Because of that special chemical handle, the hydroxyl group on ricinoleic acid, castor oil is what is known as a polyol. This means it can be used as a primary building block for creating polymers, the long-chained molecules that make up plastics. And this is where the castor bean steps onto the stage as a player in the new green economy. It is a renewable plant-based feedstock for creating a range of advanced materials. There is a specific type of bioplastic, a durable and versatile material known as nylon 11, which is derived almost entirely from castor oil. It's used in everything from the fuel lines of cars and the flexible tubing in electronics to high-performance sportswear and even the protective coatings on metal. When you see a product advertised as being made from renewable resources or bio-based polymers, there is a good chance that its story began in a field of Ricinus communis. It is nature acting as the ultimate chemist, providing us with a molecular blueprint that we can then transform into the very fabric of our modern world. From a simple bean comes the stuff of engine lubricants, lipstick, and advanced sustainable plastics. And this vast global industry worth billions of dollars and employing millions of people, from the farmer in India to the chemical engineer in Germany to the cosmetics formulator in France, has a vested interest in safety. They have perfected the industrial process to a fine art. When the oil is pressed from the seed, the vast majority of the water-soluble ricin is left behind in the solid leftover mash, which is called castor pomace or seed cake. The oil itself undergoes further refining, including heating processes, which effectively denature and destroy any trace amounts of ricin that might have carried over. The final product, the castor oil that goes into your lipstick or the engine of a plane, is completely, utterly harmless. The industry has, through careful engineering, separated the good from the bad, the useful from the lethal. But what about that leftover mash? The seed cake is incredibly rich in nitrogen, making it a fantastic organic fertilizer, but it is also where the ricin is now concentrated. And so even here, a process of detoxification is required. The mash is treated with steam under high pressure, a process called autoclaving, which, just like in the oil, denatures the ricin protein, unraveling its complex structure and rendering it inert. The terrible key is broken, its shape warped so it can no longer fit the cellular lock. What remains is a safe, protein-rich fertilizer that is then sold to be spread back onto the fields, completing the cycle. So for a moment, let's just appreciate this picture. It is a story of human ingenuity working in concert with nature's unique chemistry. We have taken a plant that carries a deadly secret and have, through science and industry, built a global economic system around its virtues. We have carefully and systematically disarmed it, separating the oil from the toxin and using both parts for our benefit. It is a triumph of agriculture and chemical engineering, a perfect system. And yet, the secret is still there. The blueprint for the poison is written into the DNA of every single one of those plants, and the process for extracting it, while requiring some basic chemical knowledge, does not require a state-sponsored laboratory. This is the heart of what policymakers and security experts call the dual-use dilemma. The same knowledge, the same materials, the same technologies that can be used for immense good can also be turned to catastrophic harm. And there is perhaps no better botanical symbol of this dilemma than the castor bean. It is both a vital agricultural commodity and the raw material for a designated agent of bioterror. It is a source of life-sustaining income for a farmer and a potential source of life-ending terror for a would-be attacker. This is not a theoretical problem. The shadow of ricin has loomed over the world of espionage and terror for decades, a constant low-level hum of threat beneath the roar of the global castor oil industry. The story that brought ricin into the public consciousness as a weapon is a chilling tale from the height of the Cold War. It is the story of Georgy Markov. Markov was a Bulgarian dissident, a writer and journalist who had defected to the West and was living in London, where he worked for the BBC World Service. He was a vocal critic of the communist regime in his home country, and his voice, broadcast back into Bulgaria, was a thorn in the side of the government. On September 7, 1978, Markov was waiting for a bus on Waterloo Bridge in London. He felt a sharp sting in the back of his right thigh. He turned to see a man pick up an umbrella and mumble an apology before quickly disappearing into the crowd. Markov thought little of it at the time, but that evening he developed a high fever. He was admitted to a hospital and his condition rapidly deteriorated. He told doctors about the incident on the bridge, but his story seemed bizarre, like something from a spy novel. 4 days later, Georgy Markov was dead. The autopsy was conducted by a team from Britain's chemical defence establishment at Porton Down. What they found was astonishing. Embedded in Markov's thigh muscle was a minuscule metal sphere, just 1.7 millimeters in diameter. It was crafted from a platinum-iridium alloy, and it had been drilled with 2 tiny holes, creating a hollow cavity. The holes had been sealed with a sugary substance designed to melt at body temperature. The cavity was empty, but the investigators knew what it must have contained. It was a sophisticated, state-of-the-art delivery system for a poison. The device was fired from a weapon concealed within the tip of the umbrella, a perfect, almost invisible assassination tool. And the poison, they concluded, could only have been ricin. The amount would have been microscopic, just a few hundred micrograms, but it was more than enough. There was no antidote. there was no cure. The Bulgarian secret police, with help from the KGB, had reached across the Iron Curtain and silenced a critic with a poison derived from a humble garden plant. The umbrella murder became a legend of the spy world. It cemented Ricin's reputation as a weapon of assassins, potent, difficult to trace, and utterly lethal. It demonstrated that a nation-state could and would weaponize this natural toxin for political ends. But as the Cold War thawed, the nature of the Ricin threat began to shift. The fear was no longer just about state-sponsored assassins with trick umbrellas. It was about something potentially more chaotic: non-state actors, terrorist groups, or even disgruntled individuals. The reason for this shift is accessibility. Unlike anthrax, which must be cultured, or a nerve agent like sarin, which requires sophisticated chemical synthesis, ricin can be extracted from a source that is breathtakingly common. Ricinus communis grows wild in many parts of the world. It's often cultivated as an ornamental plant in gardens for its dramatic foliage. The seeds can be purchased easily, legally, from garden supply stores or online. The knowledge of how to perform a crude extraction, a process involving solvents like acetone, is unfortunately widely available on the internet. Now, it is crucial to make a distinction here. The kitchen chemistry ricin that a lone actor might produce is a world away from the weaponized, highly purified aerosol-ready ricin that a state bioweapons program might develop. The crude product is often a brownish, impure mash. It is far less potent by weight and much more difficult to disperse effectively as an aerosol, the method that would cause the most casualties. But it is still deadly. It can be used to contaminate food or water. It can be delivered as an injection, as Markov learned, and it can be sent through the mail. This last method became a hallmark of the post-9/11 era. The fear of white powder in an envelope sparked by the 2001 anthrax attacks created a new psychological vulnerability, and ricin, which can be a whitish powder, became the substance of choice for a wave of bioterror hoaxes and a few very real attempts. In 2003, letters containing ricin were discovered at postal facilities in the United States, one addressed to the White House. In 2013, letters laced with ricin were sent to President Barack Obama and a U.S. senator. In 2018, ricin-laced letters were sent to the Pentagon. In each of these cases, the attacks were intercepted and no one was harmed, but they caused significant disruption and widespread fear. They demonstrated that even a crude preparation of this toxin in the hands of a single individual could trigger a massive federal response, shut down government buildings, and sow panic. The power of ricin, in this context, is not just its ability to kill cells, but its ability to terrorize a society. It is a psychological weapon as much as a biological one. This reality presents an immense challenge for governments and international bodies. How do you control a weapon when its raw material is a globally traded agricultural commodity and a common decorative plant? You cannot make castor beans illegal. The world economy, in its own quiet way, depends on them. This is where the international community has attempted to draw a line, not at the material, but at the intent. The primary instrument for this is the Biological Weapons Convention, or BWC, a treaty that has been in force since 1975. The BWC is elegant in its simplicity and maddening in its complexity. It bans the development, production, stockpiling, and acquisition of biological agents and toxins of types and in quantities that have no justification for prophylactic, protective, or other peaceful purposes. It also bans the weapons and delivery systems designed to use them. Notice the language. The treaty does not ban ricin. It bans ricin when there is no peaceful purpose for it. The possession of castor beans by a farmer is legal. The production of castor oil by a factory is legal. The research into ricin's properties by a scientist looking for a cancer treatment is legal. But the extraction of ricin with the intent to use it as a weapon is a violation of international law. The problem with the BWC is that it has no teeth. There is no formal verification regime. no international inspectorate like there is for nuclear or chemical weapons. The treaty relies on states to police themselves and to pass their own national laws to enforce its principles. And so the real work of controlling the ricin threat falls to national governments. In the United States, for example, ricin is classified as a select agent by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This means that any laboratory or institution that wants to possess, use or transfer purified ricin must adhere to strict security and safety protocols. They must be registered with the government, their personnel must undergo background checks, and their facilities must be secured against theft. But again, this only controls the purified toxin. It does nothing about the seeds. So the strategy has to be layered. Law enforcement and intelligence agencies monitor the choke points. They watch for suspicious purchases of castor beans in unusually large quantities, especially when combined with purchases of laboratory equipment and the necessary chemicals for extraction. They monitor online forums and dark corners of the internet where such information is exchanged. They are not looking for the plant, they are looking for the behavioral signals of weaponization. They are trying to catch the intent, the moment someone decides to cross the line from a curious gardener to a potential terrorist. It is a constant, delicate, and often invisible balancing act. On one side, a multi-billion-dollar industry that moves hundreds of thousands of tons of castor products around the globe every year. On the other, a handful of intelligence analysts sifting through data, looking for the one person who decides to turn a seed into a weapon. The entire global community is engaged in a kind of uneasy harvest, reaping the immense economic benefits of this plant, while constantly, vigilantly watching for those who would reap its poison. And into this already complex picture of industry, espionage and terror, walked a mild-mannered high school chemistry teacher from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Before 2008, ricin was for the general public a relatively obscure threat. It was a footnote in Cold War history, a substance that occasionally made headlines in a foiled terror plot before fading from memory. But the television series Breaking Bad changed that permanently. It took ricin from the classified files of Porton Down and the security bulletins of the FBI and placed it directly into the center of pop culture. The show didn't just mention ricin, it made a character out of it. It became Walter White's signature weapon, the tool of his cold, calculating scientific mind. The show's depiction was, for a television drama, remarkably detailed. We see Walter White processing the beans. We see the resulting whitish powder. We see him carefully concealing it in the hollow cap of a vial of artificial sweetener, and later in a cigarette. The plot lines explored its various potential uses, poisoning a rival drug lord, attempting to poison another, and the long, tense arc of whether or not he used it to poison a child. Breaking Bad didn't just use ricin as a plot device, it fetishized it. It presented it as the perfect poison, untraceable, unstoppable, the choice of a brilliant chemist. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. Suddenly, everyone knew what ricin was. The name became a kind of shorthand for a clever, diabolical poison, much like cyanide or arsenic in earlier generations of fiction. The show embedded the image of this specific poison into the global consciousness, and this created a strange and unsettling feedback loop. On one hand, this newfound awareness could be seen as a positive. A public that is aware of a threat may be better prepared to recognize it. But on the other hand, the show's detailed, if dramatized depiction of its creation and use provided a kind of dark inspiration. There were several real-life cases where individuals who were arrested for attempting to produce or use ricin were found to be fans of the show, directly inspired by Walter White. A woman in Texas sent ricin-laced letters to President Obama and Mayor Bloomberg, and her online activity showed a clear connection to the show. An actress was arrested for sending similar letters. A man in England was convicted of a terror offense for trying to buy ricin on the dark web after watching the show. Art, in this case, was not just imitating life, it was actively shaping it, and in a deeply disturbing way. The show, in its quest for dramatic storytelling, had inadvertently become a form of public education on a forbidden topic. It took the abstract threat of Ricin and made it concrete, visual, and even in the twisted logic of the show's anti-hero, almost cool. It permanently altered the public perception of Ricinus communis. The plant in your neighbor's garden was no longer just a striking ornamental, it was now the Walter White plant. The beautiful mottled seed was no longer just a curiosity of the botanical world, it was a tiny potential weapon. And so here we are, at the end of our journey, standing in a world that is profoundly and irrevocably entangled with this one plant. We live in a world where the same bean that provides the soothing oil in a baby's lotion can, in another context, become the subject of an international arms control treaty. A world where the global commodities market trades in a substance that is also on a bioterror watch list. A world where the plot of a television show can influence real-world criminal acts and force law enforcement to adapt their strategies. The castor plant itself, of course, is indifferent to all of this. It feels nothing of our fears or our ambitions. It simply grows. It follows its ancient biological programming, turning sunlight, water, and soil into its leaves, its stem, and its seeds. It creates ricin, not out of malice, but as a defense, a brilliant evolutionary strategy to deter insects and animals from eating its precious offspring. It is a masterpiece of natural engineering, a self-contained survival kit, and within that kit, it just so happens to have created a molecule that can stop our own cellular machinery cold, and another molecule that can keep our most advanced mechanical machinery running smoothly. Our relationship with Ricinus communis is a mirror held up to ourselves. It reflects our own dual nature, our brilliance in understanding the natural world, our ability to unlock its chemical secrets for our benefit, for industry, for medicine, for comfort. And it reflects our capacity for darkness, our ability to take that same knowledge and turn it into a weapon, to harness nature's defenses for our own destructive ends. We live in a state of uneasy coexistence with the castor bean. We harvest it for its gifts, we regulate it for its dangers, and we tell stories about it to process our fears. The plant asks for nothing and offers everything: utility, beauty, and a deadly silent warning. It reminds us that the natural world is not inherently good or evil, it simply is. The morality, the intent, the choice between creating a lubricant and creating a poison, that part, and all the terrible and wonderful responsibility that comes with it, is entirely up to us. And we navigate that choice, every day, in the quiet, complicated space between a harvest of life and a harvest of fear.